In this chapter, we are going to take a look at the upper leg or the proximal leg. So this is also going to include the glutes, which I could have split up into a different chapter, but for the most part, when it comes to time to draw it, you know, the butt cheeks here and the upper portion of the leg is often going to be drawn as a single volume, a single shape, just because it looks like that. So underneath the skin, you know, things are a little bit different, but the glutes are also very kind of intertwined with the different muscles of the upper leg. So it just makes it a little bit easier to explain when it's just one group, and also easier to memorize. Anyway, so let's go ahead and take a look at all the different groups that we have for the upper legs. So we'll have the glutes. So this is going to be one, and then we have three other groups. We have the anterior group, so the anterior compartment, and also you can call that the thigh, so you're probably more familiar with that word. On the back here, we have the posterior compartment, or also called the hamstrings. And on the inside of the leg, kind of sandwiched in between the two, we have the medial compartment, only visible on the inside. So let's take a look at the back first. So let's start with the one that's the highest. So we'll start with the glutes. The glutes is formed of two main muscles. So we'll have the gluteus maximus, the biggest one, and the gluteus medius, the kind of like the upper portion of the buttocks. And it's a separation that's very important to know. So that line right here is going to really be apparent when you draw the body, especially, you know, if it's a developed or a muscular body. So those two sections here, the portion at the top and the portion at the bottom, those are going to be, you can simplify those as two different spheres almost. So they are going to really be visible when we draw them. So good to understand that there's two different muscles. As far as where they attach onto, the gluteus maximus is going to attach on the back portion here. So, you know, pretty much half the muscle is going to attach on the back portion of the ilium, which is the hip bone, so the ilium part of the hip bone. And then the lower portion of the muscle is going to attach onto the lower portion of the spine, also called the sacrum, and a little bit on the coccyx or the tailbone. As far as where it attaches onto the side of the leg here, the biggest chunk is going to attach onto the femur, so towards the top of the femur. And there's also a top portion here where it splits off and it's going to merge onto this big white band here that we see going from the top, so from the side of the hip here, all the way down to the knee. And this band is going to be called the iliotibial band. So the name comes from the fact that it attaches onto the tibia and at the top here onto the ilium, so iliotibial band. And this is a band that originates from this muscle here, this smaller muscle. So this is going to be called the tensor fascia lata, so TFL for short. And this is a small muscle. As you can see here, all the white means that it's not going to really grow when you develop it. And this band here, where the top portion of the gluteus maximus attaches onto and merges with, is going to be mostly there to stabilize the hip bones and the knees. So it's just it keeps things in place essentially. Now moving on to the other muscle of the glutes, so the gluteus medius. This one is going to attach, if I hide this one right here. So the gluteus medius at the top attaches onto solely the ilium of the hip bone. So kind of like this, the outside here. So the ilium is the part that you can touch here on the side of your body. Is the one that's the surface part of the hip bone. And then at the bottom here is going to attach onto the outer side of the femur, which is this big muscle, this big bone right here. So now the main purpose of the glutes is to flex your leg backwards. So when you can take a look here at all the different muscles, all the different fibers of the muscle, when those contract, they contract along those lines, right? So this means that the bottom here is going to be pulled towards kind of the center of the spine here, upwards. And as a result, it's going to kind of bend bring your leg backwards. So it's a very important muscle group when it comes to walking, of course. And it's also going to be there to help kind of like rotate the bones, rotate the legs in different angles, and also is well, a nice cushion when you sit down. So now if we move on to the top here, not the top, but the front of the leg, so the anterior compartment or the thigh. So the thigh is going to be all these different muscles. It looks scary, but in reality, there's really 2 or 3 main muscles that we need to remember here. So we'll take a look at the biggest chunk first, this one right here in the center. This is what we call the quadriceps. Now you might be wondering why we call it a quadriceps when there's only 3. Shouldn't it be called a tricep? Well, it's because there's another one right here in the back that we can't really see because it's hidden behind this one right here, the one in the front, but now that's transparent. This is kind of like the missing part of the quadricep that we can't really see otherwise. So the quadriceps is made out of those 4 muscles. We're only going to take a look at the 3 at the top here, the 3 superficial muscles, because those are the only ones that are going to really influence how we draw the leg. And so we have on the outside here an actually pretty big muscle. We can't really tell from the front here because the iliotibial tract or the iliotibial band is kind of on top of it, but it also kind of pokes out on the side here on the back. So this one is called the vastus lateralis. On the center, we have the rectus femoris, and on the inside of the leg, we have the vastus medialis. So those are going to be the main muscles that we'll need to memorize, kind of to understand how the quadricep works. So now let's take a look at where they all attach onto. Now, if I hide the TFL here on the side, we can see it a little bit more clearly where where the quadriceps kind of attach onto. So you can see here, the vastus lateralis attaches onto the outside portion of the femur, and at the bottom here onto the patella, or called also the kneecap. All the muscles of the quadricep are going to attach at the same spot here, so they're all going to merge onto the same tendon that itself attaches onto the patella. Now, if we look at the rectus femoris, so at the top here is going to attach onto the hip bone instead of the femur, and then the inner portion of the quadricep is going to be, or the vastus medialis. This one again is going to attach onto the femur, so a little bit lower than the vastus lateralis. So that's pretty much it for the quadriceps. Again, they all attach at the same spot at the bottom here and onto the patella, onto the kneecap. Now you might be wondering, if you look at this, how is there any leverage for this muscle to extend the leg if it's flexed, right? So the hamstrings here is a little bit more obvious. You look at them here and you're like, okay, so it goes down here, it attaches onto the 2 bones, so the fibula and the tibia, and it makes more sense. If you try to pull this upwards, then you can probably imagine that the lower portion of the leg here is going to bend upwards, so it's going to help bend the leg basically. So those are a little bit more visible. But if we look at the thigh here, or the quadriceps, they don't go as low, so they don't seem to actually touch the tibia. So where is their leverage? Well, they all attach onto the patella, right? And then the patella itself has a ligament that attaches onto the tibia, and this is kind of where the connection is. So you have the patella, then attaches onto the patellar ligament, and then onto the tibia. So it's not the tendons themselves that reach all the way down to the tibia, but instead it goes from the kneecap to the ligament to the tibia. So there you go. Now moving on to the last part of the anterior compartment, or the last muscle of the anterior compartment, which is going to be this big band here, the sartorius. And this is a really long muscle, and it's going to attach at the top here onto the tip of the ilium, or the tip of your hip bone, the one part towards the front that you can feel that's pointy for some people, especially women. And this long muscle kind of wraps around towards the inside of the knee and then attaches itself onto the inside portion, the inner portion of the tibia bone. There we go. So this is it for the anterior compartment. All right, so moving on to the back then, onto the posterior compartment. So the posterior compartment, or the hamstrings, is going to be made out of a large number of muscles again. Well, not really, but a lot of different heads at least. So we'll have this muscle right here on the outside, so towards the outside of the leg. which is going to be called the biceps femoris. So we'll have two different heads for those. So the big one here is called the long head, and then we have the smaller one here that's not as visible, called the short head. Then right next to it, on the inside, sort of like the center of the back of the leg, we have the semitendinosus. So semitendinosus is a little bit hard to say, but there you go. And then on the outside here, and then as we keep making our way towards the inside of the leg, here we have this other big muscle that's going to be hidden for the most part, but it's called the semimembranosus, and this is going to wrap it up for the hamstring. So it's basically those three different muscles. So again, the biceps femoris, so those two heads here, and then we have the semitendinosus, this one right here, and then behind towards the inside of the leg we have the semimembranosus. So there we go. Now let's take a look at where they attach onto. So the biceps femoris here is going to attach, the long head is going to attach onto the hip bone, and the lower portion of the long head is going to attach onto the fibula. So the smaller of the two bones for the lower part of the leg. Now the short head is going to attach at the bottom here at the same spot, but at the top will attach onto the femur, so about at the halfway point right here. Now moving on to the semitendinosus, this one is going to attach onto the other side of the leg, towards actually the front of the leg. So it attaches onto the inside front portion of the tibia, and then wraps around the tibia, goes all the way up, and attaches itself onto the back of the hip bone again. And then finally, towards the inside of the leg here, the semimembranosus is going to attach itself onto the side, the inside portion of the tibia, and at the top will attach itself onto, we can't really see it from here, but again, very similar spot as this one here, as the semitendinosus, excuse me. So the attachment point is going to be very similar for both of them. So that's on the hip bone. And so, as far as this group here, I've mentioned it briefly before, but their main purpose is to flex the leg. So they're flexor muscles. They are going to essentially help bend or help rotate that joint here at the knee, and by bringing the upper leg upwards. So there we go. So now on the inside now. So the last of the group, the medial compartment. So the medial compartment is, again, there's a lot of stuff here, but we'll see once we get to drawing it that it's actually a lot more simple than it looks. But let's go ahead and take a look at all the different muscles that make up this group or this compartment. So a lot of them are really, really thin. So narrow, very thin band, attaching kind of the femur and the hip bone. So all those different muscles are going to have the same attachment point. So it's always from the inside, the pubis here, the inside frontal portion of the hip bone, and they all attach themselves onto the femur at some spots. So this one here, the pectineus, no different. As you can see here, attached towards the top of the femur and then onto the lower portion here, the pubis. Next to it, we have the abductor longus, which is going to be another one that attaches a similar spot towards the top here and attaches just slightly lower on the femur. In the back here, we're going to ignore that one because it's a deep muscle. We're never going to really see it. Same for this one and that one right here. Now, the third one that we are going to take a look at, the third superficial muscle of the medial compartment is going to be called the gracilis. So like gracilis. It attaches itself again, on the pubis, and then all the way down onto the tibia. And then finally, we have this one right here, which is called the abductor magnus. And this one is going to be attached at the top onto the hip bone, so the lower portion of the hip bone, and at the bottom here onto the inside portion of the femur. So there you have it. So those are all the superficial muscles that we need to know, that we need to be aware of when it comes to the leg, the upper portion of the leg. And then finally, as far, when it comes to the function of the medial compartment, it's going to be the opposite of the kind of like this, all the muscles on the outside here of the leg, including the iliotibial tract or the iliotibial band. So, all these muscles here, so those small muscles here towards the top, towards the hip, So the tensor fascial lata, excuse me, the glutes, and that iliotibial band. Those are all going to be responsible for raising the leg sideways, right? So from this position here, you would have kind of like the rotation around the hip bone, so the leg would rise upwards on the side, and those would be the muscles responsible for that. Now, to bring that leg back from that position would be the medial compartment's job. So those muscles are essentially there to bring the leg back in from an extended, so like a split position. Also, you can imagine that, if you have something in between your knees or something in between your legs and you're trying to squeeze it, those would be also the muscles that are heavily responsible for that strength. So there we have it. This is going to wrap up the upper leg portion of the body, and now we are going to take a look at how to draw this. So here we are, and we are going to be tackling this in a very similar fashion as what we've done so far. So we have 4 different compartments for the upper portion of the leg, right? So it's going to be very similar to the forearm and the upper arm. And the main difference is that we are going to add kind of the portion for the glutes. We're going to add another compartment here for the glutes. So it's going to be 3 for this section and then 1 more for the glutes. So before we can actually draw all those different compartments, and before we actually dive inside of the different compartments to look at all the different muscles that are part of it, well, we need to simplify the hip bone a little bit more. So right now this works to give us proper placements for the bones and proper proportions, but when it comes to attaching muscles, we need a little bit more than that. Not too much, but we're just going to refine our hip bone just a little bit. So when it comes to the front view, it's just a nice continuous kind of like V shape here, and pretty straightforward. It's going to be very similar for the front, for the three-quarter view here, but for the back view, we'll need to add a better indication for the ilium of the hip bone, and this is going to be something like this. So we'll take the bottom portion here of the erector spinae. So this is not going to change. So we're going to have kind of like the starting point here, and then the other starting point on the side here of the box again. And then all we'll do is pretty much do kind of like a nice curve that goes and touches this side here, so the corner as well. So the intersection that we have here, this corner right there. So we want this to be a nice continuous curve, so it can't be just like that. It has to kind of curve over and then back down, which is normal because that's the actual shape for the hip bone. And then it goes back in the front here and then kind of curves back towards the front. So that curve it's exactly what we want. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. Nice curve, curves up, touches, and then down. So the way we're going to draw the first ellipse is, well, we're going to start here at this intersection. So it's going to be the intersection, between the erector spinae, the side of the erector spinae and the obliques. And it's also just kind of like the first third of that box, right? So at the top here, it lands right on the first subdivision for a third of the box. So that's going to be kind of like the tip of the ellipse, and it's going to go down at a slight angle, kind of in the direction of the joint here for the hip joint right there, but not quite, a little bit lower than that. So it's going to look something like this. And then the next one, so we can draw it now for the front here. So a third of the box is going to be right. The start of the ellipse is going to be about right here. We can draw the line to help guide us. And if I draw the other side here, but again, this one here, we're probably not going to see at all because of all the other compartments that are going to be in front of it. And then for the three-quarter view, we're going to do the same thing here. So if we use the thirds again, right here, so top of the box and then back in. So the start of the ellipse is going to be right about here for this side. And so again, it's going to be a straight line from here to here, right? And the other side. So yeah, again, we're not going to see most of that, so we can kind of erase it. Next up is going to be the compartments for the thighs. So the anterior compartment of the upper leg. And this is going to be the biggest ellipse of them all. So we're going to start this one here, well, right at the top, right at the corner of the box, right here at the tip of the hips. And it's going to go all the way down here towards kind of like the top portion here, right before the joint, right? So that's going to be kind of like the end. So it's going to be a big ellipse, a long ellipse. There we go. And then we're going to draw that same thing here. So it ends here. It starts here at the corner. If we draw that same ellipse, it'll be something like this. And then from the back, very similar again, we start. So, you know, if we trace kind of like the inside or the other side of that box here, because that's going to be the starting point. So that would be right about here. So this would be kind of like the front. Do the same thing here again. A nice big ellipse. All right, and then next, the posterior compartment. Well, we know that it slides underneath the glutes, right? And it starts pretty much at the same spot at the bottom here. So right over the joint for the knee in the back. So it's going to start, it's going to have a similar starting point. And well, we know also that it attaches at the bottom here at the base of the hip bone. And well, the location for that's pretty simple. It's going to be the same origin or the same line here as the one for the glute, the ellipse for the glute. So if you just take that line here, that corner, or just again split that box in 3 parts, it's going to be that lower portion here, right there. So that point here, that point here. So those are going to be the origin for the ellipse. Well, what we can start to do now is draw that. So it should cover pretty much the entire side here for the anterior compartment. So we're going to draw the same thing here again. So if I split this in thirds, continue, project the line in the back. So it's going to be right about here. So that would be the start of the ellipse. If the box was invisible, we could see that point. And then the end of it is going to be in the back here, right before the joint. And so again, we're going to draw that. So from that point of view, probably not going to be able to see it. So I'm going to draw it really lightly. But yeah, as you can see here, for this one leg, we're not going to be able to see much of it. And from the front, it's going to be very similar. We're not going to be able to see it because the anterior compartment is going to be blocking it completely. Moving on then to the last one, the medial compartment. And well, we're going to start again from the back view here. The medial compartment starts at least towards the front, starts right here, you know, towards the center bottom portion of the hip bone. So we'll make it start from here, right in the corner. Make sure there's a little bit of a gap, you know, in the center here. We don't want those two ellipses to be touching. So they're going to start right here, so on each side, and they are going to end somewhere in the center of the leg right there. So it's going to be an ellipse that looks, it's a thinner ellipse that looks something like this. So in this case, you know, it's not going to be super visible, especially from the back, because it's going to be well, hidden by pretty much all the other compartments except, you know, the anterior compartment. So for this view here, the 3/4 view, in this case, we're actually going to be able to see it quite a bit. So we'll have it start again towards the center here in the front. So not the middle of the box, but almost. And then it's going to go again. And right about there, again, a narrower ellipse. And then from the front, we'll start here again. All right, so now, well, let's clean this up a little bit so that we can actually see what we have. So much better now. So I've just made a couple adjustments here to basically the width of those ellipses so that, you know, the leg's not too big compared to the rest of the body. At this point, doesn't really matter. The width doesn't really matter because we'll be adjusting a lot of stuff. But yeah, here we are. And the next step is going to go into all those different compartments, look at each of them individually, and then, well, draw the different muscles that make up those compartments a little bit more accurately. Because obviously now, you know, the ellipses are really good to place the muscles in place and to give us great proportions and basically, you know, figure out where all of these should be going. So the overall volumes. But when it comes to the muscles themselves, they are a little bit more complicated than that. So let's start with the glutes here again. So for glutes, what's important to know is that it's going to look different for men and females, men and women. So the main reason is just because of the placement of the hip bone. So as we've seen, you know, the hip bone is a little bit wider on the average woman, and as a result, it's going to impact the tilt of the glutes. So what we have right here, so the tilted ellipse here is really good to represent kind of a female glute. For male, the overall shape, you know, if we look at it from if there's no fat, if the body is somewhat toned, the shape for the butt cheek for men is going to be more of a square like this, or a rectangle, because it doesn't have to go as far out here to reach the joint. And so for females, on the other hand, it'll look more like look a lot more like this instead. So more of a trapezoid instead, so something like that instead of a square. Before we take a look at, you know, where those muscles attach and everything, let's take let's chop this in half and take a look at it from the top view here to get a better understanding of how those volumes, or how this big ellipse here is actually placed onto the skeleton. So as we can see here, if we look at this from top view, so we have the joint here, and this is one butt cheek here seen from the top like this. As you can see, they are not like that, right? So they're actually tilted and towards each other, and they're pointing at the joint. And so what's going to happen as a result is that we're not going to be, we'll actually be able to see part of the joint. So, you know, if we look at it from the back view again here, so, you know, if we're looking at it from this point of view, as a result, what we can see here is that this ellipse here covers, you know, part of the joint, but there's another part, the other half, that's still visible to our eye, meaning that we'll see it from here. So the butt cheeks never actually cover the joint of the hip joint. It just partially hides it, you know, from the back view at least. And so what we're going to do with that is, we'll start with the male version here. So with the hip joints a little bit closer to one another. And so at the bottom, we've seen, you know, the bottom of the glutes, we know that the muscle actually attaches a little bit under, a little bit below, kind of like the tip here of the femur. So we'll attach right about there. And, you know, if we consider that this portion here is the femur, like we can't see it because of the ellipses, but, you know, this here would be the femur. It's hiding. And then it'll go up and then not quite cover the joint, right? So we can erase this portion. So we'll be able to see part of the joint about this much. And at the top here, so we can just, you know, shave this off here, go from a straight line. And then towards the top here, well, it'll actually go and meet the curve that we've drawn before, which represents essentially the ilium of the hip bone. So the gluteus medius will actually connect to that right here at the top. And the gluteus maximus will actually begin right here at the intersection between the abdominal, the obliques, and the erector spinae, right there on that line. You can see a nice intersection here. So we'll actually start from there. So, and those muscles will kind of blend into one another because they attach at similar positions onto the bones, onto the skeleton, and their fibers are very similar, so they're pretty much parallel. And so those two muscles are actually going to blend into one another. So it'll be a curve kind of like this, and then attach onto the bone. And so the result, you know, this shape is basically you have kind of like one smaller circle here and then a bigger circle for the gluteus maximus. So if you want to draw, if you want to draw butt cheeks for males, well, what you can do is you draw the first ellipse here, not the first ellipse, the first circle for the top part of the butt cheek, and then the other one, which is going to be right underneath, right? So that it looks kind of like a big square like this. And those, you know, the center of those two circles should be pretty much lined up. And then for females instead, what you'll do is you actually draw the same first one here, but the second one's going to be a little bit tilted. So it'll be a little bit on the side here to be able to connect properly onto the wider hip joint. it actually makes a significant difference once everything is in place, once all the other muscles are in place. So you'll have this clear distinction between the two types of glutes for male and female. So now we attached it pretty much everywhere except this portion here. So we also know that the gluteus maximus attaches all the way down the spine to the coccyx itself, which is at the very tip of that pointy bit right there. And so we can actually extend the gluteus maximus there because it will connect there. And then, well, the way it connects back here basically onto the femur is pretty much in the straight line. So we can just draw like a straight line like this, and that should be pretty accurate. So of course, you can always sculpt that a little bit to have it kind of go around this compartment here. So slightly curve and then curve outwards. So that would be a more precise look to the muscle, but you can just draw a straight line for now and fix that a little bit later. And then there you go. So it'll go down here, curve in for males, pretty much like go straight up. And then this portion here, the gluteus maximus, will start to fade, start to branch out. But still, we don't want a muscle that looks weird. We know that the gluteus maximus is just this big, nice chunk, almost like an ellipse, but not quite. So we don't want to deform it too much. So we try to maintain the shape as much as possible. And so again, for female, the main difference would be that the gluteus maximus has to go a little bit further out to reach. And as a result, the butt itself will look a little bit wider. Now, it's always good to practice the direction of the muscle fibers. So every chance you get to draw those muscle fibers properly, always do so. So we know that it starts right here and that it attaches pretty much along that line here. So the origin for all the muscle fibers is going to be pretty much this point right here. And so what we can do is it starts like this, and then goes here, attached at the top, Same thing here, attaches there. Now we're pretty much done when it comes to the glutes. There's just one more thing that I want to tackle, and that is going to be kind of the second attachment point for the gluteus maximus. So we know that already that it attaches onto the femur here, right about there. And we also know, because we've seen it not too long ago, that it actually branches out right underneath the joint here and merges onto the iliotibial band, which is a band of tissue that pretty much runs along the side of the leg like this part. So now let's work on the glutes from this angle here. So from the front, we're not going to be able to see it. From this angle, since the gluteus maximus attaches here on the back, so at the intersection between the erector spinae and the obliques, we know that we're not going to be able to see it from this angle because it would be kind of like right here in the back. So we're not going to be able to see that attachment point, but we are definitely going to be able to see the attachment point for the gluteus medius. So the gluteus medius attaches on the side of the body pretty much, right? So if you had like a straight line, like cutting the body in half on the side here, it would be right about there. So, and that's going to be about where the gluteus medius attaches onto. So that's going to be kind of like the front of it. So we'll attach there. And so we know that we can actually erase this portion here, and we'll slide underneath everything in this compartment here, in this anterior compartment. And for the gluteus medius, we also know that it attaches right here at pretty much the tip, or right onto the joint right there. So, the bottom part here would kind of go like this, up and attach here. And then it would start pretty much at the same spot here, then wrap around and attach somewhere in the back here. And so this is what we would see from the gluteus medius from this particular angle. Then everything else here would be the gluteus maximus. So the gluteus maximus, we know that it splits off here and right underneath the joint to merge with the iliotibial band, which is going to be this band that's pretty much like on to the side here of the leg. And so we'll merge with that somewhere. We'll figure that out later when we get to that anterior compartment. But we also know that if we hide the thighs here, that this muscle attaches right below the joint here of the femur. Now if we bring this back, we can start to erase the portion that we're not going to be able to see because it's going to be hidden underneath. And again, we're not doing anything magical here. We're just taking the ellipse that we already had And in certain angles, it's going to work better than others. So from the back view here, we had a little bit more shaving off to do, but from the side here actually works quite well. So we don't really have to shave off much. It's really just continuing those muscles, making sure that they attach at the right spot, and we should be all set. So there we go. Now let's move on to the thighs. So the anterior compartment, which is going to be playing a big part in defining the shape of the entire leg. But before we can actually, start tweaking that ellipse here, there's one more thing that we need to do, and it's going to essentially find out where the tip of the hip bone, or the tip or the end of the ilium towards the front of the body is going to be, because that point is going to be the origin for a lot of different tendons and muscles. And so we really need to figure that one out. So far, it's been perfectly fine to use the side of the box here, the corner of that box, as that point. But now we need to figure out where that actually is really, because it's not quite on the outside here. It's a little bit more closer to the inside of the body. So if we look at the hip bone on its own, right? It's not a box, obviously. It's going to be something that we have towards the back here. We have the spine. So the spine and the coccyx ends into this pointy bit here, right? So the spine, and then the hip bone is going to start here. It's going to start right there at the base, go up, and then it's going to be the start of the ilium, and then the ilium will kind of go around the hip like this. So around the hip like this, the same line here on the outside. So we'll go like this towards the front, back towards the front of the body. And then we'll kind of end just like this, and then it'll go back in, and then do a bunch of stuff. But basically, it ends right there. And then this is something that you can definitely feel. If you feel it on your stomach towards the front. So it's that same line here. We're just going to continue that line, that curve, and that same line here that follows kind of the outside of the obliques. And right past that corner here, if we continue it past the corner, which is about, if I change color, the corner is right about there, right? So if we continue that line just a little bit and stop right here, this is where the tip of the ilium, so this pointy bit here, is going to be. And this is where a lot of the stuff is going to attach onto. So we really need to figure that one out and place that properly. So, anything past that line, anything past this point here, past the tip of the ilium, if you press here on your stomach, there's not going to be any kind of resistance other than your organs and your muscles. So you won't hit anything hard. There's not going to be any bone in the front here. So you can try yourself, right? So press. There's not much, but you'll definitely be able to feel that one here, especially women. So you should be able to see this if you're particularly skinny by just sucking your tummy in, or for most people, at least most women, if you just lay on your back, those should be quite visible. And this is that bone. We need to figure out where that bone is, and it's very simple. So with the guides that we already have, we just got to continue that line a little bit past the corner. So we have the corner that's right here on the outside. If we just continue it down, follow the same outside here, the same line for the outside of the obliques. We just continue it just a little bit and then stop. This is where that tip of the ilium, this pointy bit here, is going to be. And now that we have it, which is about right there, it doesn't have to be super precise, of course, everybody's different, but just not on the outside here, right? So we just continue towards the center, not too far down. Again, we're following this curve. We're not going right in. We're following the curve for the outside of the obliques. So we don't want to go too low, because then that'll look kind of weird. So it has to be more towards the outside. And so yeah, as a result, it lands right about there. And now once we have that point, this is going to be the start for everything. And then the main thing that we want to do with this ellipse here is turn it into a teardrop shape. So the top of the teardrop, the pointy bit for the teardrop is going to land, as you've guessed it, right on that point right there. So we're going to do the same thing for all the different examples here. So all we have to do here is pretty much trace a straight line, or kind of straight. We don't want a curved line at the beginning. It's a teardrop, right? So it starts maybe a little bit concave, either concave like this or straight. And then we want to have it blend with the outside curve here that already have for the ellipse. So we want to make sure that that line is nice and that it flows nicely into one another. We don't want this, right? So we don't want a sharp angle like this. That doesn't exist in the body, at least not with muscles. And we don't want it to curve too soon like this. So a nice teardrop, you know, we can start to have it kind of connect towards the center of the shape. Right about there, maybe a little bit lower than that. So something like this. And then we do the same thing on the other side. Straight line and then curves and kind of merges with the outside line. And then all we can do is kind of erase the parts that we don't need. And then we'll see already this gives us a much more accurate leg, right? So this is a much better silhouette for the leg, at least compared to what we had before. So we'll do the same thing here, exact same thing. So we can start, we know that the corner for the box is right there. So all we have to do is continue that line, following the curve on the outside here for the obliques, follow the curve a little bit and then stop. So the tip of the teardrop is going to be right about there. This is going to be, you know, on both sides, right here, right here. This is going to be the tip of the ilium in the front, and then this is going to also be the starting point for our teardrop shape. Like this, down, blend, down, blend, down, and blend. And then we can erase the rest. All right, and then we'll do the same thing for the back here. So again, you know, we can continue that line here. We know it's going to be a line that flows nicely towards the center. It's going to be the same curve. It goes like this, wraps around the side of the body and then continues in the front, but we'll stop right about there at the tip of the ilium. And then we do the same thing on the outside, merge. Starting here again. On the outside and then merge with the rest. And so as a result, you can see here that we're getting rid of a lot of mass. So from the back view, again, you know, like we've seen before, where this merges onto the iliotibial band, this is really going to influence the rest of the leg. As you can see here, all that top portion is now gone, and that looks a lot more like a real leg. So now we can start to to subdivide it into its proper muscles, because right now it's still, you know, still a pretty simple shape, but now we can go in and actually add some details in there and make that look like real muscles. So the first thing that we're going to do is starting from the top here, we're going to subdivide this entire shape in 3 parts, 3 equal parts. Add some guides in here if you want to use that. So at any given point here, split that in thirds. Of course, as you can see here, this is going to get tighter and tighter towards the bottom, but that's fine. And in thirds again, so something like this. And then we'll start and we'll follow that line, follow, and then all the way down. So this is going to be representing the 3 different visible muscles of the quadriceps. Of course, there's another one that's hidden behind here, but we're not going to be able to see that one. And all those muscles, as we remember, they all go and attach onto the patella right here. So the kneecap. So not too low, they're going to attach right here. I think the top portion of the kneecap, this is where all the tendons are going to blend into. So we can continue those lines here. And the main thing that we need to pay attention to here towards the bottom is that the the tendons, where the tendons begin, is going to impact kind of the overall shape of the quadriceps, really. So the tendons don't all start at the same spot. So they're not, it's not a straight line like this where starts here, starts here, starts here. They're actually a little bit offset. So the one for the center here, the rectus femoris, this one is going to be the highest. So it starts higher than the other one. So it doesn't start too high, right? It starts just higher than the other ones. Now the vastus medialis, which is the inside muscle here of the quadriceps, this one is going to be the one that goes the lowest. So it goes pretty much all the way down to the outside of the original ellipse that we drew. So it's going to pretty much end right there. So much, much lower. And then, well, on the outside here, where we have the vastus lateralis, in this case, it's going to be kind of an in-between. So it's going to be a little bit lower than the center one, but a little bit higher than the inside one. So the result of that is that we're we are going to get kind of the typical look for the quadriceps when we draw it, knowing where all of these are supposed to end. So we know that the two on the outside end a little bit lower than the one in the center, and that the one on the inside here lands lower than the one on the outside. And as a result, we'll have kind of like a big chunk here, a big chunk on the inside that goes a little bit lower, like this. And then in the center, well, it'll seem like this one is being squeezed in between, right? So it will often look something like that. That's the reason. So all the tendons begin at different spots, and this is why you get kind of this uneven shape. So what's important to know, what's important to remember is that the center one often gets squeezed between the two on the outside, and that the muscle on the inside, or the vastus medialis, again, this one is always lower. So on the inside of the leg, the quadricep is always lower on the inside. All right, so we're going to do the same thing here on the other views. So we have, again, to split this in 3 parts, mostly equal. Of course, we know that this is not a flat surface, it's a curved surface, it's an ellipse, but an ellipse in 3 dimensions. So something like that. So from the front here, it'll look like it's all nice and evenly split. But if we look at it from the side view here, well, obviously there's going to be some of those muscles that show up a little bit more. So vastus medialis here is going to be on the inside, so we're not going to see it as much because it's going to be hidden by the other two that are in front. Then we have this one here. So the rectus femoris in the center, and then the vastus lateralis on the outside here, which will appear, at least from this point of view, to be the biggest one, which it actually is, because we know that it reaches all the way back on the leg, and then we'll have kind of like the iliotibial band kind of cover a portion of that. So from the front, it looks pretty even, but if we look at it from the side, we have to keep in mind that this shape here is not flat. It's actually a curved surface, a 3-dimensional ellipse. And so the separation lines will look different depending on what angle we're looking at it from. So we'll be we'll have the opposite here. So we'll have the vastus lateralis pretty much hidden on the outside here. So we'll see it peek through a little bit, but not much. Then we'll have the rectus femoris that's going to be significantly more visible. And on the inside, the vastus medialis, which is going to be, well, right there. So we can have those and in their proper location right here onto the patella, and then we can adjust the tendons based on what we've seen so far. So of course, again, the muscle in the center always a little bit higher than the other ones. The ones on the inside, the one on the inside always a little bit lower. So right, where we have kind of like the end of the ellipse, right? And then the one on the outside, kind of in between, just like that. And what we'll be able to see here on the outside, where gluteus maximus kind of goes in to connect onto the femur, well, all this portion here, this is going to be the vastus lateralis. So we'll be able to just kind of continue the line like this, have it merge in front here. So we're not going to be able to see the front part of it, but it would go in front and attach onto the patella, right? So from the back, we'll definitely be able to see that muscle. We have 2 more muscles to add to this compartment. So we've done the simplest one. Now we have the sartorius, which is going to be the long band of muscle going across the entire length of the thigh on the inside. And we also have the TFL, the tensor fascia lata, on the outside here, which is also going to be the origin for the iliotibial band. So this one is a little bit easier to see and to figure out if we look at it from a 3-quarter view in this case here. So what we're going to start is, well, we need to figure out where that TFL is going to attach onto. And it's basically going to start right here where the gluteus medius ends. So it's going to start right there, so pretty much onto the side of the body. So if we take the body and split it in half, from the side here, it would be right onto that line right there. And then of course, that line that it's following is the ilium of the hip bone. And so it's going to follow that line all the way to the front here onto the tip, right, where all the other muscles are going to start from. And so this is going to be the attachment point right there for the TFL. And then we also know that basically it's just a big muscle, a big band that just wraps around the outside of the leg and then attaches onto the outside portion of the tibia, right? So right about there. So if those are cylinders, it would attach right onto that cylinder right there. So it's going to start and follow the curve, not the outside curve, but the inside curve for the vastus littoralis, right? So this one right here is going to follow this muscle here. So it's going to follow the curve, and then right when it's past the joint, it's going to curve back in. So branch out from that curve, and then kind of just follow the shape of the, follow the other lines. So branch out a little bit and then become kind of like a parallel for those two lines all the way down to that outside of the tibia. And now the back line, so we have the front here, the front curve. Now the back one's going to be a little bit more simple. So we just start here from the side of the body, the side of the hips. So right down the middle, if you were to chop the body in half, we start from here, and then just a line down, right? So it just goes down and then meets with that portion here. And then we can color that the color of tendons, because that's exactly what this is. And then there's one more thing that we need to do with this band here, and it's where it connects onto the glutes, right? So we know that it actually the top portion here of the gluteus maximus splits in half. One portion here towards the bottom goes and attaches onto the femur, but the top portion actually blends with that iliotibial band. So we can illustrate that with that color here. So those two portions here are actually going to blend into one another. Here, the gluteus medius is actually going to slide underneath and attach onto the femur. So that's a pretty good representation of the TFL and the iliotibial band. Now we also need to add kind of like the muscle portion of this thing here, which is going to be just a small ellipse towards the front here, a long ellipse. Doesn't go all the way to the back, but definitely goes all the way to the front here. And yeah, it'll attach on the ilium here of the hip bone. So following that line right there. And it'll go down about a little bit lower than the crotch, right? So we have kind of like the crotch right here. So it'll go slightly lower than that, and end right about where the joint is. So you're not going to have much growth around the joint here. This is kind of the limitation for that TFL, that tensor fasciae lata muscle. Now we would be done with that particular muscle. On the outside here, we're not going to really be able to see it. Now for the back view, well, we are going to be able to see it a little bit. So we'll have the, towards the top here, we're not going to be able to see much, but right here on the outside where the gluteus medius ends is where that tensor fasciae lata would start. So it would be right there. And then we'll just kind of go down here, and we might be able to see it a little bit like this, poke through. And then again, we'll just kind of follow that curve, kind of go back and blend with that ellipse, that curve for the ellipse, all the way down, and then branch out and attach onto the outside of the tibia. All right, and then what we can do here, the top portion of the glutes, or the gluteus maximus, I should say, well, it's actually going to blend with this. The gluteus medius kind of slides in and attaches onto the femur. The outside, not the outside, but this side here is a little bit complicated to see from the back view or from the front, and we haven't really taken a look at it from the side view. So let's do that now, and it should help to kind of understand what's going on there. So we'll start here with the hip bone, hip joint right there. So the tip of the femur, and then all the way down here we have kind of like the first ball for the knee, and the second one. So those are the two cylinders seen from the side. Now at the tip here we'll have the start of the anterior compartment, and I'll add on the glutes, and we'll have the hamstrings. That hamstrings will go something like that, and then the glutes will slide right in between those two, right in between the hamstrings and the anterior compartment, and attach actually a little bit higher than that, because we know that if the femur is right here, it attaches right underneath the tip of it and slides right in between like that. And then we'll have, you know, the hamstrings that go up here and attach at the base of the hip bone. So we're not going to be able to see that. Now, when it comes to the splitting the glutes in the two different muscles, so we know that, you know, the rectus spinae is right about there. And so that would be kind of like the intersection where the gluteus medius begin. And it'll just be kind of like a straight line like this, going towards the joint itself, because that's where it attaches onto. And then for the iliotibial band, well, it'll just begin kind of like right here. So if we split the body in half, it would be right about there and meet the glutes, and it'll just kind of be just a straight line down. And it's very similar for the front here, except it'll just overlap the anterior compartment a little bit before it kind of just goes back and meet at the bottom right there. As you can see here, the gluteus maximus, the top portion for the gluteus maximus merges with the iliotibial band, and they all attach here on the side of the tibia on the outside. And they also happen to cover the joint. So yeah, from the side view, it would look something like this. And of course, you know, the muscle here, the TFL, is only going to be towards the front. So the mass is only going to start really, you know, from this point on. Everything that is blue, that's going to be tissue that's not going to grow. So it's going to be the iliotibial band. So basically just tendons. To finish this off, so from the front view, it's not going to be as visible, but it'll still start, you know, right about here on the side. It'll make a small bump, again, around that box, right? So we want to hide the entire box. And it's going to go like this, and then it'll just follow the same lines all the way down here, and then attach to the side here of the tibia, again, on the outside. And then it'll kind of just go down like this, following that same line, right? So we're still following this line here, following it, and then once it's past the joint, then we can start to curve back on the outside and just blend with that line right here where it ends onto the bone. So that would be pretty much it. So as you can see here, the one thing to remember is that towards the bottom, not much change, but towards the top here, it does cover about, you know, a third of a quarter of the vastus lateralis, which is the outside muscle here for the quads. So now moving on to the last muscle, which is going to be the sartorius. And so the sartorius is going to be a significantly different muscle than everything else we've seen so far. So it's a long, narrow, thin muscle that is going to start from the same spot again, so the front here of the hip bone, and it's going to basically just wrap around the leg and attach towards the front of the tibia right there. So wraps behind the actual joint, so behind the actual joint of the leg, and then back in the front, and then attach it onto the tibia. So it's essentially this shape here. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but this is pretty much the shape that you want to go for. Now let me refine that a little bit more. The start of that line is actually not going to be following the same. It's not going to be following the same curve here for the teardrop shape. It's actually going to be a concave shape. So again, very similar to the TFL, like here, you know, where it hides a big portion of the vastus lateralis. This sartorius is going to also be hiding quite a big chunk of the vastus medialis on the inside. So it's going to be very similar. It's actually going to cover a bigger portion than the TFL. So it's going to be a little bit lower than that, right? So it's something like this. So a concave line that goes like this, and then wraps around and kind of back of that shape, so we can't really see it because it's in the back, or not really the back, but it's on the side here, and wraps around the leg, then back behind the joint, and then again comes back in the front here to attach in front of the tibia, right? So it'd be something like that. So starts here, starts narrow like all the other ones, becomes a little bit wider, a concave shape that hides a good third of the vastus medialis on the inside of the leg, and then kind of just disappears, you know, towards the peak here of the curve, and only reappears at the bottom before it wraps around the tibia to attach in the front of it. Now, if we do the same thing on the other examples right here, so we're going to start the same way right here. And then in this case, you know, since I'm looking at this at an angle, well, I'm not going to be able to see much from the right leg right here. So the band will seem kind of just, it'll be like behind this shape, right? But it will be visible for at least the portion where it covers this muscle here, the vastus medialis, right? So we know that it covers it a little bit more than the iliotibial band does on the outside muscle. So it'll actually curve like this, concave on the inside, and then will kind of just disappear behind the leg. So we'll still kind of see it, kind of like that. And it'll hide, and then reappear again and attach in the front here. And then we can do exactly the same thing on the other side here. So again, curves, hides a big chunk of the vastus medialis, and then curves on the inside, kind of behind the shape, behind the original ellipse, and then back behind the joint, and then again in front of the tibia where it attaches onto. There we go, so a little bit cleaned up. And now I can actually erase this part of the medial compartment because we're definitely not going to be able to see that. So now, moving on to the back view right here. And so we're not going to be able to see a whole lot of it. Again, like we've seen before, this is a muscle that's mostly towards the front of the leg, a little bit on the inside here. So, you know, when it wraps around the joint, we'll kind of see it here. So we'll go from the outside here, then wrap around and down here in the front again, where it's going to attach in the front of the tibia. So yeah, that would be pretty much the extent of it. So now moving on to the hamstring. So the hamstrings are only going to be really able to see it from the back view like this. And as we remember, it's pretty much 3 muscles. And two of those are going to be very visible, and then one not so much. So the first thing that we can do is split that entire shape in half. So at the base here, pretty much right before the joint, those 2 halves are going to split. Then one is going to wrap around the joint and go attach onto the fibula. So we're not going to be able to see it in this case, but the attachment point is going to be very similar as this one right here. So we can kind of consider that it goes there, even though it actually attaches onto the fibula. So fibula a little bit lower. So the fibula would be right here, right? And so, yeah, let's just consider that it still attaches onto the side right there, because really, you know, the tendon is so small at this point that we're not going to be able to really tell where it attaches onto by just looking at it. And so that's one half of it. And then the other half, well, it's going to go do the opposite. So on the other side right here, and it'll merge with the sartorius and attach again, you know, in a very similar spot towards the front of the tibia. So that would be pretty much the shape of the hamstring. So there's only one muscle that we've seen that we need to add in here, although it's not going to really impact much at all, but it's going to be the semimembranosus. So the one right behind this one here, which is of course the semitendinosus. Here it attaches at the same spot onto the tibia, but towards the bottom here is just a little bit wider. On the inside here, where the gluteus maximus connects onto, or not connects, but attaches onto the femur, we might actually be able to see the bone here a little bit. The hamstrings might not be able to cover the whole thing. So we might get a peek of the bone here depending on how muscular or not the subject is. Now moving on to the medial compartment, so the last of the compartments finally. And what's good to remember with the medial compartment, even though it seems tricky and seems complex because there's a lot of different muscles that in that compartment, is that really from the back view, you'll be able to see 2 muscles, and from the front view, you'll be able to see 2 more, right? So from the back view here, the 2 muscles that we'll be able to see are the abductor magnus and the longer gracilis. So the gracilis is going to be pretty invisible from this point of view because it's going to like follow kind of like the outside of the leg like this. But what it will do is impact the silhouette at the crotch level. What we'll need to do is we need to shave off a portion here. So basically, you know, starting from the crotch, we need to make sure that there's enough room in the center here for the crotch. So we're going to slice off a portion of that ellipse. And then from this point right here, where we started cutting, we want to go a line straight down onto the inside here of the femur. And so it's going to be a straight line like this, boop, and then this is what we'll shave off. Right, so it's going to be just a basically more narrow ellipse. Front view here is going to be the same thing. So we start here at the crotch, a straight line going from here to the femur, so the inside of the femur. And again here, make sure there's enough room in the center. Go from this point all the way down to here. So now that we're left with this shape here, basically we just need to subdivide this properly. So we'll have two big muscles from the back, like I just said. So we have this one right here on the inside, which is going to start, it's going to use that outline right there. And that line is actually going to continue all the way down here to the, and it'll just attach with all the rest. So we'll kind of go right here around and attach in front of the tibia with all the other tendons. Right, so from the back it would look something like this. Now if we show the rest, as you can see here, it becomes pretty invisible, this muscle, but what it does is limit or create kind of like this straight line here from the crotch all the way onto the inside here. And then it's a little bit hard to see from this angle, but it actually slides in, like I've said, right between the sartorius and the semimembranosus. So this muscle here, underneath the two other ones for the hamstrings. And everything that's left, so this small portion right there, well, this is going to be the portion that is called the abductor magnus. And it's actually going to push a little bit more the hamstrings in. So it's going to take a little bit more space than that. But it's essentially from this, you know, from this back view, just a triangle. And, you know, to find out where that line is, or what that line is, the angle for that line, you just kind of start from the hip here and kind of trace a line. So it'll be that same line right there. So if we clean everything up, it would look something like that. All those muscles, right? So all the hamstrings muscles and all the medial compartment muscles all attach onto the same spot here, or at least a very similar spot onto the hip bone itself. So it doesn't attach onto the femur. So all of these, they all go up here and kind of attach right there, right? So here, all onto the lower portion of the hip bone. So now there we have it. We have the abductor magnus here that slides right in between the very narrow gracilis, which is this narrow band that we've drawn initially. And it also slides underneath the semimembranosus, which is this portion here, this back portion here of the hamstrings. So a little bit complicated, but you can definitely, you know, simplify this entire thing as just this one triangle right there. Those muscles are only going to really be visible when the character is like bent forward and is very muscular. For the most part, the back of the leg here, there's not going to be much. You know, when it comes to drawing it, of course, all these tendons here are just going to be a big blur. The main line that you want to pay attention to, if I change the color to make it more obvious, the main line really is going to be this line right here, and of course the bottom of the butt cheek here, and how it creates this clear difference between the back, the muscles for the back of the leg and the muscles for the front. So this is going to be really the shapes that you want to pay attention to. You know, those volumes here, those three sections. But as far as the back view here, that would be it for the leg. Now we can move on to the front here. So like I said, you know, two muscles for the back, and there's going to be two more for the front. And those two muscles in the front, they're going to be, well, I say two muscles from the front, but we'll actually, in this particular angle, we're actually going to be able to see this one right here. So the, you know, the longer, narrower gracilis. And so it's going to be the same line right there. So this is going to be the line for the gracilis, but then it'll just kind of go behind the sartorius and we'll kind of lose track of it. And now the two muscles that I want to talk about for the front, they're all going to originate at the base here of the abdominal group. And these muscles are going to go and attach onto the femur. So the one closer to the crotch here is going to go attach about the halfway point of the femur. So we have the femur right here. If we make that line longer, even though it's not going to be visible, right? It would attach pretty much right here onto the bone. So we can keep that line right there. So it's going to be the line for the first of the muscle, so for the abductor longus. And then the pectineus, well, it's just going to attach slightly higher than that, you know, still following, still attached onto, you know, that same line right here, which at the same time acts as the line for the hip bone. So it's going to attach slightly higher. It's going to have a similar width. So all these bands have similar width, right? So we have the sartorius, this width, this one's going to be the same, this one's going to be the same. And well, in this case, it just attaches a little bit higher. So we have like this one will just attach a little bit higher onto the femur. So something like that. So we can keep that line right there because it's pretty good. And then we just fill this in. So moving on to the other side here, we have the same deal. So we have, starting from the crotch pretty much in the center here, we have the abductor longus, which is going to attach right at the center of the femur. So we're about this line right there. And then we'll have the pectineus, which is going to be a little bit higher and attaches a little bit higher again, higher onto the femur. And I said from the front we can only see two of them, but since we can see the gracilis here from the side view, we might actually be able to see it here as well. So it might just be like this, very, very subtle, but goes down and then down again and attaches here. So following that line here, probably able to see it a little bit. All right, so from that view, we'll be pretty much done. And there we go. So now we can move on to the front view and add whatever is missing. So from the front, we're going to be able to kind of see the gracilis a little bit again because it's a straight line. So we'll see it kind of like this and all the way back here and merging with these tendons. And again, this is a very, very small, from this point of view, very narrow band of muscles. So it's not going to take much room, but it'll impact kind of like the inside silhouette of the leg here a little bit. And then we have the abductor longus, which is going to be from here towards the center of the femur, and the pectineus, which is going to be like this. And we would be done with the upper leg. So now moving on to the next chapter, we're going to take a look at the lower leg. See you in a bit. In this chapter, we are going to take a look at the lower portion of the leg, or the distal leg. So the distal leg is going to be made out of 3 different compartments. And well, again, you know, it's a fairly complex kind of portion, a fairly complex part of the limb, just because, again, it controls, you know, a fairly complex instrument. So it controls all the toes, it controls the heel and all the different kind of rotations, all the different positions that the foot can take. And so it requires a lot of different muscles in the hair to be able to move all those different things, all those different bones. So even though it might look a little bit scary like this, there's actually not going to be that many things that we need to remember when it comes to the lower portion of the leg. So we're going to start from the top, the frontal compartment, which is going to be called the anterior compartment once again. So the anterior compartment is going to be this group right here. Next, we'll look at the lateral compartment, which is going to be sandwiched in between the anterior compartment and the posterior compartment, which is going to be this big chunk right here. So the posterior compartment easily makes up the majority of the mass of the muscle for the lower leg. And it's also going to be the one that's most responsible for kind of the silhouette of the lower leg. So then if we move onto each individual muscle, so let's take a look at all the different muscles that make up those different compartments, starting from the front with the anterior compartment. So the anterior compartment is going to be made out of 4 different muscles, most of which we're not going to see, and they're mostly irrelevant for artists. But let's still take a look at all of them so that we know what's in there. So the one that's going to be the most visible is called the tibialis anterior. It's this big one right here, the majority of the mass for the anterior compartment. Then right next to it, we have the extensor hallucis longus, which is going to be in charge of extending the big toe. Right next to that, we have the extensor digitorum longus. So all those muscles in the front here, they're all extensors, right? So same as with the hand, they are there to extend the toes upwards from a flexed position. So this one right here, extensor digitorum longus, is going to be in charge of all the other 4 toes. And so we have here a final muscle, a really small one, that is called the fibularis tertius, which is going to be this one right here. And again, very irrelevant for us artists because it's going to be mostly hidden under a bunch of other stuff. Now moving on to the other compartment here, so the lateral compartment. Lateral compartment is going to be a little bit more simple. So it's made out of two visible muscles that we're going to take a look at. So the smaller one here that's mostly hidden is called the fibularis brevis, and then we have the bigger one called the fibularis longus. So then moving to the back of the leg onto the posterior compartment. The posterior compartment is going to be made out of 2 big muscles that we need to pay attention to. So the first one is going to be called the gastrocnemius, this one right here, or also, the calf. And we have another big one that's kind of right underneath and visible from the outside for both sides of the leg, called the soleus. The gastrocnemius, obviously this one is going to be key when it comes to drawing the silhouette. It's the calf muscles, it's super, super important. We also have this band right here, which is the Achilles tendon, and is going to be a significant part of the body in that it defines really clearly where the muscle begins and where it stops, right? So we have this white here where there's not going to be much development, and the red here where all the muscles are going to actually grow. So this line right here is good to memorize because it's going to be always visible on pretty much anybody. Now there's only one more thing that we need to cover when it comes to the lower portion, the lower leg, and that's going to be kind of the attachment points for all those muscles. So let's start from the back here. So the gastrocnemius itself attaches onto the top here at the top, onto the lower portion of the femur on kind of both sides. It kind of splits. One end goes towards the inside, the other one towards the outside. And then at the bottom here, it's going to connect onto this Achilles tendon. And the tendon itself is going to be the one that connects onto the calcaneus, which is, just the heel. Right behind that, so the soleus, this one is going to be attached on, at the bottom here at the same spot, so it kind of merges onto this Achilles tendon. And at the top here is going to attach towards the top of the tibia, and on the inside here along a long portion, kind of half the portion of the tibia. Now moving on to the side here with the lateral compartment, this one is going to attach itself here at the top onto the side of the fibula, the very top of the fibula, and at the bottom is going to go into a tendon and then attach itself somewhere around under the foot. So for all these, for kind of like the lower portion of all these muscles here for the lower leg, we're not going to really pay attention to any of those because they all go down to a really small tendon, and then they're just there to kind of help control the foot and move the bones in all the different directions that you can. Same with the hand, right? So it becomes really complex here, and overly complex to the point where we don't really need to know any of that. So to keep things simple, just try to take a look at where the white is and where the red is, right? So the red is where it's going to grow, the white is where it's not going to grow. So you can tell here at the front, the tibialis anterior, the lower portion of that muscle, when it goes into a tendon, this portion here is never going to grow. So the portion that grows is going to be underneath the knee and stop a little under the halfway point of the tibia. So then finally, moving on towards the front of the leg with the anterior compartment. So again, we've seen kind of where the lower portion, all those tendons attach to, and it's going to be mostly to move, to extend the different toes. But as far as the connection points towards the top here, towards the knee, the tibialis anterior is going to attach onto the outer side of the tibia, and same thing with the extensor digitorum longus, except the extensor digitorum longus, this one is also going to share a attachment point with the fibula. So it's going to kind of be a connection between both of those bones. And this pretty much wraps it up when it comes to the lower leg. So, you know, it seems a little bit scary. There's a lot of stuff going on in here, but when it comes to drawing it, it's actually one of the easier part of the body to draw. So, you know, the amount of muscles really is not a really good indicator of the complexity of the drawing itself when it comes to time to draw it. So enough talking about that. Let's actually check it out and see how to draw the lower leg. The lower leg section is going to be a little bit different than what we've done so far. So instead of using an ellipse for each compartment, in this case, you know, we've seen that the lower leg has 3 different compartments. We're only going to trace one, and we're going to be able to pretty much do everything with that one single ellipse. And so this is, yeah, like I said, it's a little bit different, but it's simpler this way. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first ellipse, and it's very important that we place it properly because there's only going to be one. And the first mark that we need to pay attention to is going to be the start of the ellipse, which is going to be right under the joint right there for the knee. And then that ellipse is going to go down at about the halfway point of the tibia. So the tibia goes like this, and not really the tibia, but at about the halfway point from the knee to the heel. So if the heel is right here, you take the halfway point there, and that's going to be kind of like the lower limit for that ellipse. And then we're not going to trace it straight down. So instead, we'll want to trace it at a slight angle. So not too much. We don't want to go like this, right? It's just a slight angle. So imagine that instead of being like right in the center here, right down the center, we'll want to aim a little bit more on the inside of the leg. So not the outside, on the inside of the leg. And as for the width of that ellipse, just make sure that it's at least as wide as the knee. And that's it. So bigger is good, but smaller or narrower than the knee is not going to look quite right. From here, what we want to do is basically take the largest, not the largest, but the widest point of that ellipse here. So in this case, on the outside here, it's going to be a little bit higher because the ellipse is tilted, and on the inside is going to be a little bit lower, right? And then we can actually trace a line between the point here on the outside where it's the widest, and then a point on the inside where it's the widest. So it'll be about there, and we can trace a line in between like this. And this is going to give us kind of like the angle that we need for our calves muscles. And so from there, from those points here, what we want to do is trace a straight line meeting with that ball here for the heel. And so this portion here is going to represent in part the Achilles tendon, but also the soleus, which is going to be right underneath. And then for the top portion, very simple. All we have to do is we start from the same point here, and where we want to go is straight up and then kind of like tuck underneath the hamstrings. So same thing here. Take the widest point, go in and slide underneath the hamstrings. And so we'll have kind of like this V right there. If we split the calf in half, down the center, right here, down the center of the tibia, not down the center of the ellipse itself, but down the center of the tibia. So the inside portion here, as you can see as a result, is going to be a little bit bigger in volume compared to the outside. And that's perfect. That's what we want. So when it comes to the back view, all our construction lines are there, and we're ready to kind of just clean up everything. So from the back view here, as you can see, pretty simple. There's not going to be much more than that. So the calves, where they're going to attach here at the top, is going to be basically wrapping on top of that cylinder right there. So, you know, the lower part here of the femur. And they're going to wrap around that. And so it will look something like this. And then we can finish off kind of like the entire shape here. And the reason why I had this line right there, this diagonal from one point to the other, is because that's also going to be the angle for the base here. And this is going to indicate where the tendon begins. And because, you know, the tendons here at the back is not straight, right? So there's always on the inside of the leg, the calf muscle will appear to end lower than on the outside here. And that's for that reason, because it's slightly tilted. And so from here, we can indicate the start of the Achilles tendon. It's going to be this big band of tissue right here. Very, very strong tissue. And then, yeah, so from the, we can bring this back here in the center. So the separation for the calf muscle. And up here is also just tendons. Every bit of the muscle that is kind of overlapping the joint is going to be more tendon than muscle. So as far as the posterior compartment is concerned, that would be it. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And now before I move on to the other muscles, the other compartments, I just want to tweak the skeleton here a little bit. So this skeleton here should be a little bit better, and this is a better representation of kind of like the joint while still keeping it super simple. So again, a cylinder here at the base, just like this one right there. And the cylinder is going to be laying on top of a ball, which is also going to be used for the heel. And now if I show the rest that we've done so far, now everything lines up still, and that is going to give us a much better frame to work on. So from there now, there's only going to be one more compartment that will be visible from the back view. Well, yeah, kind of. And that is going to be the lateral compartment. So the lateral compartment will begin right on the outside of the box here, creating by the joint, right? So it would be right on the outside corner, right there, on the lower portion of it. In reality, it actually starts right onto the fibula, which is a little bit lower than that. So the fibula would be more like something like this. But yeah, for simplicity's sake, let's just consider that it attaches right onto the corner, and that should work quite well. So that corner would be right about there. And so what we do is just kind of like add a little bit of mass to that outside silhouette that we already have. So we don't want to create anything crazy. Just follow the outline that we have here. So the same thing here. Of course, at the top here, it kind of goes back in. But as soon as you can, try to get kind of like this width right there. So maybe, you know, the width of this should be about, you know, about half the width of the Achilles tendon at the bottom here. So you just eyeball it too, you know, it's just making sure that is not too wide. There's not going to be any muscles there. It's all tendons and bones and ligaments. And so just like the wrist here, there's not going to be much mass. Same thing here. And then on the other side here, on the inside, what you can do, there's a bunch of muscles here, but what we can do to simplify things is just starting from the inside here, from the heel, not the heel, but from the ankle, kind of just go back in and merge with the rest of the line. So something like that. And that should be good. So again, the outside here always going to be lower than the inside. So in this case, that's because the fibula goes down and goes actually lower than the tibia. So as a result, it'll be a little bit lower. So just again, consider maybe the lower corner or the lower part here of this rectangle as your ankle on the outside. And on the inside here, it's going to be kind of like the top of the box instead, right there. So quick tip, you know, it's always the opposite of the calf muscles. Now, moving on to the front view. The front view is going to be very similar. So we're going to start with the same thing. So right here underneath the joint at about the halfway point, we're going to trace a nice ellipse that is at least as wide as the knee itself. And that ellipse is going to be slightly tilted towards the inside of the leg here. And then from there, we're going to trace the outside, or try to figure out kind of where the heel is. It should be about right there. And we're going to trace starting from the widest point, a line going straight down from one side of the ellipse to the other side here of the circle. Same thing on the other side. So now, of course, you know, the bone is going to be hiding this here, going to be hiding this here as well. From this angle, we'll be able to see two more compartments. So on the inside of the leg, basically, you know, if you take the tibia here and you split it in half, everything that's on the inside is not going to change. So everything that we have here is actually correct. So we'll be able to see here part of the gastrocnemius muscle or the calf muscle. We'll be able to see just a little bit of the Achilles tendon towards the bottom here. and the probably more of the soleus, which is going to be kind of right in front here. And the soleus, it starts, as we've seen, it has very similar starting point as the Achilles tendon. So we're going to start it like this, use the same outline here that we traced, and the soleus is going to go, and right where it meets this ellipse here for the calves, it's going to go and back in right at about the halfway point of that ellipse. So if the halfway point is right there, this is where it's going to attach onto the tibia. So slightly different from the back view because we'll be able to see this portion here of the soleus from the front, something we couldn't see from the back view. Next, we're going to draw the anterior compartment, so the one in front, and it's actually going to be pretty simple. So at the top here, where it's going to attach, it's going to be right here, basically a continuation of the iliotibial band right there. So it'll attach right underneath onto the outside here of the tibia, and basically what it'll do, it'll try to match the same shape as this original ellipse that we already had. So you can kind of try to make it blend into one another just like this. And towards the bottom here, what it's going to do, instead of going back in like this, it's only going to go and try to fade a little bit lower onto the leg. So not quite at the halfway point like the ellipse that we drew initially, but just a little bit lower. So maybe at 2/3 or something like that. So right about there. And then that is going to be the mass for the anterior group. Super simple. And then what's going to happen essentially is that it's going to use the bone, use the tibia as the limitation for it. So this is a muscle that is attached directly onto the tibia, and it's now going to cross over the other side. So right down the center here of the tibia, that's where that group will stop. And of course, on the lower end right here is going to turn into a tendon. So we can illustrate that. And then it'll end right onto the top of the foot. So that would be kind of the anterior compartment. So again, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now, the only one that's missing again is going to be the lateral compartment. And just like we did for the back view, it's going to be the same thing again here. So we have this outside line already. So what we're going to do is it's going to start at exactly the same spot. So if we have, the box here, the cylinder, we'll start here on the outside, and it'll be the same thing. So we'll want to give a little bit of thickness on the outside here. And then from here, we're going to create and kind of like join the bump here, the lower corner to create the bump for the ankle on the outside. And on the inside here, we can also kind of just blend like we did for the back and use the top of the cylinder or the top of this rectangle for the ankle on the inside. So again, you have this angle here, that angle here, and we should be all set. So that would be it for for the front view here. So at the ankle here, all the muscles are going to kind of bunch up together, just like with the wrist. And we're not going to be able to really tell them apart, but it'll be a mix of bone right here. So the white part's always going to be exposed. So, your tibia is exposed for the most part. And then, so at the top here, all those tendons from the back of the leg, from the hamstrings, from, all these other muscles that we've seen so far, they all attach here in the front. And we're not going to have to change much of that. So now when it comes to the knee itself, well, we know that on the upper portion here, we have the patella. So all those ligaments here merge onto the patella. And then we have the patellar ligament that goes all the way down here and connects those two set of bones, those two section of the limbs. So, when it comes to the shading of it, if you just cover everything with a layer of skin, all the construction lines are pretty much all the same. It's just, you just soften a couple things here and there. And you have a working leg. So that would be it for the front view. Now moving on to the 3/4 view. So from the 3/4 view, again, we are going to start with a big ellipse starting at the back here. We are going to connect to the heel. Now for the anterior compartment, like we've seen, it's going to start right where the iliotibial band kind of ends. And what it will do, well, it'll go down here, stop at the bone, all the way down a little bit lower than, the halfway point. And then I'll just create kind of like this nice ellipse, just like that. And again, since this is going to end right onto the top of the foot, the ligament, we have to make sure that it's tilted or angled towards the top of the foot, right? So something like this. On the outside here, we're going to see it attached right there. So we'll have the same thing. We'll have part of that ellipse. It's actually going to match kind of like the outside of the circle. And again, it's going to go towards the center of the top of the foot, the center of the tibia. Now, for the lateral group, it's very similar to the anterior group in how it basically blends seamlessly from this one right here, so the iliotibial band, onto the anterior compartment. It's going to be very similar for the back here, for the lateral compartment, in that it's going to blend from the hamstrings, so from the ligaments from the hamstrings, which are themselves going to go down and attach onto the tip of the fibula here. Or again, we can consider it as just going to be kind of like the lower portion of that box right here, right? So if that joint is a box, then it's going to be right at that lower outside corner, right there. So that's where kind of like the ligament for the hamstrings would go and attach. And then seamlessly, just like this one in front here, it's going to blend and turn into the lateral compartment. So, and then for that, we can use kind of like the outside that we already have here. And yeah, just follow kind of like that same line. That's going to work out pretty well. So there we go. And then here for the ankle, what we can do again is just kind of wrap around that cylinder towards the bottom, and here going to continue kind of like the top here, top line, so that we are left with an ankle that has kind of like an outside bump a little bit lower than the inside. Now for the other side, we are going to be able to see the lateral group a little bit, but it's going to be very similar to what we've seen so far, right? So from the back view here and from the front, so it's going to be just a little bit of mass just added. And then yeah, we'll have the bone here, so that doesn't change. So the bone's going to hide part of that muscle. And we have the calf, or the gastrocnemius, and then we can kind of close the lines here. So wrap all of this up like this. So those are all going to be kind of like the tendons here, wrapping around the joints and attaching in the front. There we go. So so far, pretty simple. There's only one line that we need to figure out here, and that's going to be the one basically tracing the outline for the soleus. So something like this. And to find out exactly where or how that line should be angled, and I'm talking about this line right here, right? All you have to do is take kind of like the outside of the leg right here and how it merges into this tendon here. So the iliotibial band, and then you just continue towards the outside, and that should give you the proper line. And then on the outside here, it basically ends in the concave area of that line right there. So if we look at it from this side here, we would have, if I add a little bit of meat onto that, right? So if I add the skin on top of this joint here, it would be something like this. And you just continue that line, and that would give us the indication for the soleus. So you would have the calf muscle right on top, and then the soleus underneath. And then we might be able to see kind of like a portion of the Achilles tendon. So there we go. With a little bit of fine tuning and kind of just painting over everything, making sure everything's nice and clean. We still have the patella there, and we still have the patellar ligament at the bottom here, attaching onto the rest of the tibia, or the not the rest, but attaching onto the top of the tibia. So here, everything that is white is the bone itself, the tibia itself. The tibia, like I've said, is exposed for the majority of its length. And so there we go. Now that's the only thing that would go on top of it would be just skin and fat, and that would be all. So that's it when it comes to drawing the lower leg. And next, we're going to take a look at the feet. In this final chapter for the anatomy class, here we are we are going to take a look at the foot and its anatomy. So we haven't really, we haven't really talked about the different bones of the foot. So much like we did with the hands, we are going to take a look at the main ones, the ones that you should probably know, the bones that are mostly responsible for moving the different toes, right? So, but before we get to that, let's take a look at the one that's really important here, the heel, right? The one that we call the heel. It's going to be called the calcaneus, and this is going to be the one the Achilles tendon attaches onto. So it's a really important bone, and as you can see here, the shape that it creates really pushes the volume or pushes the silhouette of the foot when we look at it from the side here backwards, right? So it's not straight down to the heel, it's actually down and then outwards and kind of this convex shape. So something to remember. And then moving on to the different toes. So we'll have the bigger bones right here. So the ones responsible for kind of like all the main movements and allowing kind of your foot to bend. Those are going to be the different metatarsals. So you have the first metatarsal here, second metatarsal, third, fourth, and fifth for all the different toes. And then very similar to the fingers that we've seen before, each of the different toes will have the first phalanx here, which is called the proximal phalanx. So proximal phalanx 1, proximal phalanx 2, 3, 4, and 5. And by the way, phalanx plural is phalanges. So the proximal phalanx first, and then the second kind of joint here is called the middle phalanx. So all your toes except your big toe have them, very similar to the hand again. And then at the tip, we have the distal phalanx. So distal phalanx for the big toe, and then all the other toes, 2, 3, 4, 5. So to recap again, proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, distal phalanx, and the big toe only has 2 of those, so it's missing the middle one. So there you go. So now if we take a look at kind of the muscles in here, there's not much, and that is why you'll never really see muscular feet, because there's just not much to grow in here. So most of it is going to be tendons. As you can see here, there's a lot of different tendons going along the foot. But as far as muscles, we have these small ones here that you can probably see. If you try to bring your toes upwards, so you'll see it flex on your foot. But that's pretty much it. That's going to be the only really volume change that you'll ever find on your foot. Then if we look at the bottom of the foot here, we'll see the flexor muscle. So you might have been wondering where the flexor muscles were, since we've been talking about the extensor, this one, for example, the extensor digitorum longus. Just like the fingers, we have extensors and we have flexors for those fingers and those toes. And then there they are. So we have the flexor digitorum brevis, and this one here for the big toe is going to be actually this muscle right here that we haven't really talked about, but there you go. This is going to be the flexor for the big toe. So kind of a different layout for the feet. And again, though, there's not going to be much development here in terms of volume. If you the way that you could do this is by flexing your toes a lot and somehow having some resistance there. Of course, those are the muscles that are going to not fail, but are going to relax too much for people that have flat feet. But yeah, so as far as changing the shape of your foot, those muscles are definitely not going to do much. There you are. So this is the basic composition of your foot. And a quick recap, because this is something that you'll probably have to draw quite often if you're drawing characters, is these 2 bones right here and where they land, right? So we have the tibia on the inside, and the tibia, the bone for the bump here at the bottom of the tibia is always going to be a little bit higher than the bump for the fibula on the outside. So something to remember, inside's always higher, the bump on the outside's always lower. So there you go. Now let's take a look at how to draw the foot. For a lot of people, drawing the foot is going to be something that's quite scary, almost as much as drawing the hands. And that is due to a number of reasons. So the main one will have to be visibility. So it's not a part of your body that you get to see as often as the rest. So for a very large chunk of your life, your feet are going to be covered with something. So whether it be shoes, socks, boots, whatever. And for that reason, your eye is not going to be as tuned as to what it should really look like. So it's a lot more of a foreign part of the body for a lot of people, as opposed to your hands, for example, that are always within your field of vision. So most people, even though you might not know how to draw them properly, you'll be able to spot mistakes when you see a hand that is wrong. So even if your capacity to draw it is not up to par, you'll still be able to spot something is wrong, even though you might not be able to correct it yourself. But when it comes to feet, that tuning, that eye for detail, that eye for mistakes is not going to be as great because you don't get to see it as often. And then there's a number of other reasons. So a lot of people think that the foot is just not as appealing a body part as others. And it's also something that is, for most character, very, very far away from the focal point. The focal point of most characters is going to be, their face, unless it's not, but generally speaking, it's going to be the face. And so, when you think of your feet, that's pretty much the thing that's farther away from that. And so not only for yourself, on your day-to-day thing, but whenever somebody looks at a piece of art, the feet again are going to be the thing that they spend a very small portion of time looking at compared to the rest. And so there again, there's always an incentive to not really pay attention to feet and how to draw them. But we'll definitely break that, and we'll definitely try to approach it in a way that's simple so that we can easily draw the foot, because as you'll see, it's actually quite simple. And it is also something that's very important that we get right. So just like, the hands might look broken if you don't draw them properly, the feet not only can they look ugly if you don't draw them properly, but they can also very easily mess up the perspective in your scene. So the feet are going to be the things that basically connect your character with its environment. If you're drawing a character in an environment, of course, but if you don't get this right, if you don't get the perspective right, then it might make everything look wrong. So it might make the entire environment look a little bit off, as it's not matching the character, or vice versa. And so it's going to be very important that we get this part of the body down, very, very well. So hopefully by the end of the chapter, it shouldn't be something that's as big of a mystery. And so let's get started. This is going to be a kind of 3 different parts. So we're going to tackle this in 3 different blocks. And so the first thing that we'll take a look at is going to be the silhouette of the foot. And so this is going to really help fine-tuning our eye and making sure that when you look at a foot at first glance, to know that it's right or wrong based on a number of proportion, a number of things that we're going to take a look at. So if you can spot mistakes this easily, that's a really good start. And also for whenever you draw whenever you draw feet, this is going to really help in making sure that the placement is correct and that the proportions are correct and that the overall shape works. And then from there, adding in the details inside, there's much less risk of everything going wrong if the overall silhouette is correct. From there, we'll take a look at the different parts of the foot. And there's going to be 4 of them. So we'll take a look at all of those in detail. And those parts are going to be very important when it comes to placing the foot in different angles and different perspectives, and also just understanding the basic volumes that make up the foot. And then finally, of course, we'll look at all kind of like the smaller details, making sure that the foot looks like a foot and not just like a construction drawing. So getting started then with the silhouette. We're going to start from the front here, and very similar to what we've done with the limbs, we'll be looking at the foot in a bunch of different angles. And so when it comes to drawing characters, if you become a concept artist, if you're a concept artist, there are going to be a number of poses that are going to come back more often, and those are pretty much it, right? So seeing a character from the front view, if you're trying to display an outfit, if you're trying to show off kind of a piece of armor, or whatever it might be, you're going to definitely have, or definitely draw a lot of characters seen from the front in your lifetime, if you ever draw characters, if that's something that you're into. And of course, in a 3/4 view like this is going to be kind of the basic view for to figuring out kind of like the proportions of, not the proportions, but the different volumes, the perspective of the feet. And then from the back view here, not as important, but still it's going to be good to know what it looks like from the back. You know, if you have characters kind of like running or things like that, you know, characters seen from the back, which might of course happen. And then after, you know, at the very end, we'll take a look at all that we've covered and try to draw the foot in a bunch more different angles to see kind of you know, special cases and things like that. So there you go. So starting from the front view here, the silhouette is going to be a little bit different than you probably are guessing if you've never really looked into it. So a lot of people would probably think that, you know, the majority of the mask is going to be kind of like this, right? So that would include the foot itself and the toes. And in reality, it's going to be a lot more tilted to the side. So that's going to be more of a correct proportion, more of a correct silhouette for the foot. And to explain that, let's take a look at a foot from the top view like this. So if you draw a simple foot, you know, it probably looks something like this. So very simple. So you have the heel, and then you have the ankle here. And then, of course, you know, the foot is not going to be like this, right? So everybody can probably agree that there's kind of it gets a little bit wider towards the toes and then back in, you know, whatever that might be, the details. We'll take a look at this later, but you know, it's not going to be parallel and it's not going to be too intense of an angle. It's going to be just a slight angle, something like that. So anyways, once we have this basic shape here, and you don't even have to worry about the toes or anything like that inside, it's really the overall shape that we want to pay attention to. And, you know, a lot of people would probably draw a foot like this and be satisfied. And it's not bad, but it's not quite correct. So there's something that's very important to note when it comes to the foot, is that the overall shape of it is not a straight line like it seems like it is, or more like a V like this. It's going to be more of a banana. So it'll be tilted like this. You'll have a clear curve going from the front of the toe to the back. And that's very important that we place that in, that we consider that, because it's going to affect a couple things, as you're about to see. So on this example here, I've added the ankle, so the bone here for the ankle, on the inside for the tibia, and on the outside for the fibula. And in the center here is just kind of like a cross section of the ankle itself. Maybe, you know, if we were to cut it right here. So seen from this angle, what we're going to have to do is, without really touching the toes or the tip of the foot too much, it's really going to be this line here on the outside that we'll want to curve like this, like that. And so if we go with something like this, right, we curve it, make sure that it doesn't get too wide at the bottom, and we don't want to make the foot longer or anything like that. Just want to fix kind of the orientation for it. So it'll be something that's a little bit more like this instead. So now if I erase the old lines, we would be left with this silhouette instead. As you can see here, a lot more curved, and this actually brings up a couple of points that we'll need to take a look at. So now if we take a look at the ankles here, there's actually three different things I'm going to point out here. So the first one is going to be the ankle. So the ankle, as you can see now, the one on the inside is going to be clearly visible, you know, when you're looking at a foot from the top view. And on the outside, on the other hand, it's not, right? So it'll be kind of part of the silhouette itself. So if we were to fill this with a single flat color, that would be the shape that you get now. So we would only be able to see the ankle on the inside when you look at a foot from the top view like this. Of course, you know, if we look at it from a different angle than this, it might be different, obviously. But seen from the top, the exterior, so the ankle on the outside here, is going to not be visible. So it'll be part, you know, we'll have to shade it, of course, if we're to draw the foot like this, but it's not going to impact the silhouette of the foot. So that's the first thing. Next, take a look at the angle for the ankles, right? So the ankle on the side of the tibia here is always going to be a little bit more forward compared to the one for the fibula. So you'll always have a slight angle like this instead of a parallel line, not a parallel line, but a horizontal line. So just like just like they are kind of tilted from the front view here, where the outside one's always a little bit lower, it's also a little bit tilted back, right? So it's a double tilt. And then the last thing I want to talk about is going to be the width of the foot here at its widest. So to figure this out, is going to be quite simple, and all you have to use really is going to be the width of the ankle itself. So when you look at the ankle like this, including kind of like the tip here of the bones, so basically this entire distance, this entire width here for the ankle, you're going to take this and just make sure that it's at least wider than that. So you don't want anything to be any narrower than the width of the ankle. So it's always going to have to be a little bit wider than that, but not more than 1.5 times the width of the ankle. So if the width is something like this, right, you wouldn't want to go past what this is about halfway. 1.5 times would be about something like this. You don't want anything wider than this for the widest part of the foot. Now, if you're drawing a cartoony character or something like this and you want it to have like really wide feet, the way to do this would, you could still have a wide foot, but one thing to remember would also be to make sure that the ankle follows, right? So that the ankle gets wider as a result. So if you're not respecting those proportions here, the foot is going to look a little bit wonky, won't be as believable. And yeah, so when it comes to cartoon, it still works. You can definitely deform everything as much as you want, as long as you do it in proportions. And so this is going to be pretty much it. So just to recap, right, if we have a foot, an ankle that's this wide, you might be able to go about this width here for the foot. So you would have kind of like this much of a wiggle room. Now then, going back to the front view. And so now we're aware of what this looks like from the top. And as I've mentioned at the beginning here, the foot's going to be a little bit more tilted on the side here, and you can kind of see why. If this is the center, if we trace the center of the foot right along the heel, there's a lot more mass on the outside here than there is on the inside. So on the inside, you'll have maybe the big toe and a part of the heel, but that's about it. As opposed to the outside here, where you'll have pretty much all the toes and like the main volume of the foot, on top of having a big chunk of the heel itself. So to figure this out, kind of like the limitation here in the front, well, what we can do is follow the line on the inside of the leg here and kind of just ignore the ankle here, the ankle bone. What we'll do is just continue that line until we reach kind of the ground. So, in this case, the ground would be right about here. And so on the inside, that would be the limitation for the foot on this side right there. And then for the outside, well, what you'll want to do, again, make sure that the width of the foot is at least as wide as the ankle, right? Like we've just seen, and maybe make it a little bit wider. So that would be maybe as wide as this. So you can place that distance here on the ground already. And then what you'll want to do, so the foot is going to start basically, if you trace a line from the peak of each ankle, from one peak to another, what you can do is along this line and making sure that it's as wide here as the actual leg before it reaches, before the two bumps here. So if we just take the width here, basically the narrowest width of the ankle itself before the ankles, this is going to be kind of like the starting line here. So it's going to be this wide. So what you want to do is trace that line here. So it doesn't quite go out all the way to the tip, and it's going to give you kind of a tilted line like this. And then from there, well, you just connect the dots. So from here, and then that would be kind of the overall shape, the overall silhouette for your foot seen from the front. Now it's super, super simple, granted, but this is pretty much what it should look like. Now, really quickly here from the back view, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. So we follow that line here on the inside, ignore the bump for the ankle, and reach the ground. The ground is going to be this line right there. And the reason why I'm not tracing the ground right here onto the heel is because this is a representation for the actual bone, right? So you'll have a little bit more padding onto your foot, and this is why there's some distance right here. And so anyways, so this is going to be the limitation for the inside of the foot, and then the only thing that we need to figure out on the outside here, where is it going to stop? So again, it's going to be the width of the ankle at its widest, and we can trace a line from one peak to the other. So one peak here to the other side, and it's going to give us a tilted line like this. And now the last line that we need to figure out is going to be the one here starting at the top of the foot, and that line, that width here is going to be the same as the narrowest part of your leg here. So normally that's going to be right above your ankle, right? So it's going to be this width right there. So something like that. And then you can connect the dots from here to here, and then from here to here. And we are left with this shape right there. Yeah, that would be a proper silhouette for it, right? So we'd have kind of like the small toe right there and the heel, something like this. So then if we move on to the side view here, what I have is just a very, very simple representation of the lower portion of the leg. So we have the knee here, and then the patella in front, and then we have the joint for the ankle, and then we'll have kind of like the bottom of the foot here. So we'll have the calcaneus right there, and then kind of like the rest of the foot. And what we're trying to do with this particular angle is figuring out how long should the foot be. And again, this is going to greatly vary between one person to another, but this should give you a good idea, and it should be a really good starting point in that it's always going to look right if you do it this way. The way to measure all this is you can use any of those landmarks really, but the one I like to use is the one starting from right below the knee all the way down to the ground. So the floor, you can consider the heel laying on the ground or on the floor. And so you take this distance right here, so right under the knee, all the way down to the ground, split that in half, and that's going to give you, one of those halves is going to give you the length of your foot. So let's try to do it here. So we'll split basically this entire distance here in half. So, right about there. And so if it's right here, this distance right here, if I rotate this, so it's going to land right about there. So I had it quite correct already. That would be kind of like the proper length. So that would be the toes, the tip of the toes, and then the back of the foot, of course, here would be a little bit further back. So if we have the bone here, the actual heel is going to be further back, right? It's not going to line up like this. So foot doesn't look like that. It's actually, that's a really important bone here that we need to take into consideration. And so, yeah, we would have a foot like this, and that would be kind of the proper size for it based on the length of this portion here. So from this side view, to figure out the length, this is how you do it. And of course, you can use the same proportions for any other angle that you want to draw it in. And then now this is going to lead me into the second portion here that I wanted to talk about, and which is going to be all the different blocks, all the different pieces that make up the foot. And so we're going to have 4, like I said. So we're going to have the heel itself, which is going to be this portion here. We'll have the portion in front of the foot here that includes all the metatarsals and all the ligaments, all the different tiny muscles that make up the foot. So all those smaller details that we're not going to really be able to see with a naked eye. For most people, we might be able to see kind of like the ligament at the top here, but that's going to be about it. And so this is going to be the second portion, the second block. And then of course we'll have one for the big toe and another for the other 4 combined. So from the top view, we would have one group right here for the toes, one group right here for the other toes, and then one for this portion in the front of the ankle, and the one in the back for the heel itself. Those are going to be the 4 different pieces for the foot that we'll take a look at. Now, before I take a look at those in more detail and what this is going to look like, in 3 dimensions, if we stick to 2D for now, let's take a look at how the foot can actually rotate, because this is going to be important. If you're drawing characters that are in dynamic poses, you want to make sure that the foot and the feet look right, that they don't look too twisted, or so just making sure that it looks correct. So seen from the top view here, how much you'll be able to rotate your foot is going to be pretty limited. So generally speaking, it'll be around 90 degrees. So, unless, and you can try that yourself. Again, I've mentioned this before, but it's very limited compared to the hands, about half the range of the hands, half the range of motion. So it'll be about 45 degree this way, 45 degree this way, and in total, it'll be about 90 degree in total. So of course, you can go past that if you rotate the heel along with it. But if you're trying to not move your heel at all, just the foot, you won't be able to go any further than that and any further than that on either side. And so we'll have a big point of rotation right here, right? So it'll be able to rotate this way. And around the same joint on the side view here, so the joint really is going to be, you know, this part right here. So this joint right there. So around this joint, you'll be able to rotate like this, and you'll also be able to rotate this way. But again, it's going to be pretty limited. So again, about 90 degrees max. And this is going to rotate the entire foot. So if I select this whole thing right here, so your foot will be able to rotate like this and like that, but you know, it's still pretty limited. So this is going to be the first joint that gives mobility to the foot. And then we'll have another one, and that's going to be it, really. So we'll have, of course, I'm not going to count, you know, each joint for the toes, but really the other joint that's important here is going to be this right here. So the one separating basically this group here, this group right there, and the two groups for the toes. So we'll be able to bend like this. So it's going to be fairly limited again. So from the top view here, you know, the toes are not going to be able to go this way individually or this way individually. So they'll always move with this joint right there, but they'll have some mobility on this axis, however. So you'll be able to point your toes upwards and flex them downwards, right? The toes, the foot can do this motion here. It's pretty limited, as you can see. You're not going to be able to get that much deformation with that part of the body, and that's good because it makes it a little bit easier for us when it comes to time to drawing it. Next, if we look at the different parts of the foot and in 3 dimensions, so we'll be able to get a better glimpse at how they work and how they interact with one another. So 4 groups, 4 different volumes, 4 different simple shapes that we need to figure out. So the first one I have already drawn here, and this is going to be for the heel. So it's going to be a cylinder, or you can think of that as a hockey puck. And it's a very Canadian reference, but yeah, for those who know hockey, that is going to be laying right underneath the joint here for the heel. So it's not exactly that, but again, we're just trying to get the correct proportions, the correct volumes in correct perspective. And so after that, we'll be able to kind of fine tune everything and make sure everything looks good. But for now, let's keep things simple, and we're going to start with this shape right there. And like I've said, it's going to be landing right underneath here, the joint for the ankle. So if you want to trace kind of like the hockey puck, it'll be something like this. So as you can see here, it doesn't go far enough back, but that's fine. We'll add that curve a little bit later. So it would be this shape right here. So if we have, again, the width here of the heel, the hockey puck would be right underneath. And that cylinder, if we look at it from the side view here, we have kind of like the cylinder here, it's right down the center. And then from there, what we'll want to do, and I have it drawn here from the front, 3/4 view, and from the back already. The next shape is going to be a little bit more complicated. So this is going to be the one for this volume right here. So this part of the foot. And it sounds complicated, and if I were to draw it on its own, it'd be a little bit tricky, but it looks something like this. It's a shape like this, and it flares out, it looks something like that, and then in 3 dimension, right? So it would be a volume like this. So it's higher here than here, but it would be a shape like that. So if I trace kind of like transparency, right? So it's a volume similar to this. So now if I draw it on the character here, what we'll start with is the correct length, but we're not going to draw anything else. So we're only focusing on this particular portion of the foot. Next, we'll add the toes. But if we go by the rule of starting at the bottom here of the knee all the way down to the heel, and that is going to give us kind of the length of the foot. So if I do the same exercise here from here to here, so if I take about half of that, right about here, so that would mean that the foot would go, in perspective would be about like this. So a line from here to here, and that would give me kind of like the proper length of this foot. And I can do the same thing on the other side here. Now, if you want to make sure that those are lined up properly, well, just look at the angles that we have here. So the knees, the heels, so it's going to be a similar parallel. So it'll be something like that. So maybe it's a little bit too long here. So it would be a little bit more like this. Now, quick tip to make sure that your pose is not too robotic and doesn't feel too stiff. Just try to make sure to not have your feet parallel to one another. So make sure that those two lines here, distance between that line is never the same. You can go either way. You can go more like a penguin, so more like on the outside, more on the inside to represent a character that might be a little bit shy or something. But just try not to have them parallel to one another. It just really doesn't look that great. Now I can erase all the guidelines, and you don't actually have to draw any of these, but for the sake of explaining. Next up, we can actually erase the portion that's underneath. And what we want to do is we'll want to take the distance here, so from the outside, so everything that's in front of the foot really, or in front of the leg. We'll want to take the length of this here now, so not the full length, not going back all the way to the heel, but starting here in the front, take that length and split it in 4, and so in quarters. And basically the toes are going to land at 3/4 of that line, so right about here. So now we have all the guides that we need. Now we're able to trace this actual shape here. So like we've seen, we're going to trace a line from one side of the ankle to the other. It's going to give us kind of this slightly angled line from here to here, from here to here. And then make sure that we only considered the portion, the narrowest part of the leg. So it'd be, this distance here. So maybe a little bit longer actually. And then, well, very similar to what we did in this example here. So what we want to do is we'll have those two lines kind of go down here. So go down to the ground, down, down. And then from there, we'll want to have them flare out just a little bit. So that only means that you're not going to trace a parallel line to this one right here. So it's going to be just diverging just a little bit like that, maybe a little bit more. And this should naturally kind of give you a decent width for the foot, but again, we can do it the way we've done it before. So making sure that it's at least wider than the width of the ankle itself. So something like this looks pretty good, right? So you can just kind of trace a straight line again. Do the same thing on the other side here, from here to here, making sure it's wide enough. So that would be pretty good. And now, well, we can finish off the shape, right? So we have pretty much all the guidelines that we need. So I'm going to erase stuff in here so we can actually see this a little bit better. But the outside of the shape would be something like this. So we can give this a little bit of thickness. This is going to be where the toes are going to start. And then we connect the corners to finish the box. And then like we've seen here, we will also need to actually adjust the overall shape, because right now, it's a straight line. We've seen that it's not actually quite like this. So what we can do is just tweak slightly the line here on the inside and on the outside, everything. And then what we'll want to do as well is making sure that the line here with where the toes are going to begin is not a straight line, because as we can see here, it's more like this shape right there. So it's going to be going up at about 3/4, about 1/3, excuse me, and then down again for the rest of the 2/3. And so we're going to start here. So the part here where the box ends is going to be the longest of it. So what we can do is actually start to dig inside of that box. So 1/3 right here, 2/3 on the other side, and then we can adjust that again. It's shaped like that, and then we can erase kind of like the inside portion here, make sure that the curve matches. Now our volume looks a lot closer to an actual foot. So on the inside here, there's one thing here, there's a line, we need to adjust this line right there. So far, we've seen here from the outside that the line for the length of the foot is actually pretty straight, right? But this is only if we look at the foot on the outside. So if we look on the inside instead, well, it's actually going to curve in like this. So the other side is going to be like that. And on the inside of the leg, it'll actually curve like that. So it's different. So there will be a curve here and nothing on the side. So it'll be something like that instead. Which is why, by the way, that if you walk in the sand, well, your footprint is going to look something like this. So you'll have like the top of the foot, the heel, and then maybe something on the outside here. And then of course your toes. But it's not going to be, this portion here is not going to be visible because there's no pressure here. As you can see here, it's lifted from the ground. So which is why the only print that you'll leave is going to be the one that is laying flat on the ground. So the outside line here, of course, all the points of pressure here where your weight is going to be mostly distributed on. And of course, your toes, that is wise. Now, the last part, the toes, we're going to start with just one block and then split it in half. But essentially, what we want to follow is the same guidelines that we already have here. So we're not going to follow the box. So ignore the box. We're still going to keep that one line here in mind. And so that's why I didn't erase it yet. So it's still there. And again, you don't have to do this every time. You don't have to trace the line, but it just helps as an easy guideline to go by. And what we'll want to do for the toes is make sure that we maintain this width right here all the way to that line. And now, we can adjust, this line here. So what we'll want to do is just match what we have here already. And so this line here, make sure that we maintain the thickness. There we go, something like this. Clean this up. I can start to kind of fade this out a little bit, but not completely, because we're going to use kind of, this line here to figure out where the toes are going to start. So now if we take a look at the other side here, well, we'll be able to do the same thing. So like this, make sure that those lines are correct. And now we are left with something like this. So of course, I'm going to go from this point here to that point here, and this is going to give us kind of like the line for the big toe. And then all the other ones, we're going to have to split this in 4 parts, right? So split in half and then in half again. So from there, what we'll do is split this in half. So split the big toe in half, and then we'll continue that line across the other box as well. So just like that, making sure again that this is parallel. You can also use curves if that's easier. So you can have curves like this, curves like this, curves like this. If you don't want all those sharp angles, whatever works best for you. And then what we'll do again is ignore the big toe. Now we're done with that. And we're going to split again all the other toes in half. And this is going to represent kind of the other joint for those. So if I zoom in here, now it's not quite perfect. So all we need to do is kind of add the step here. So really, all those toes, they're more like a stairs, right? So this is what those lines represent. So it's a level here, and then you have kind of like the step, and then another level here. And this is going to be mostly flat, 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 flat. And then it kind of dips down here at the step. And then of course it'll dip here on the other side as well. I just need to represent that a little bit better, as if they were on a separate level. And then just like on the other side, we would be left with a change of surface here, change of direction. So now, of course, those are all like super blocky. The next step would be, of course, to kind of smooth everything out and introduce some nice curves in here. So what I'm going to do is drop the opacity on this like that, so we can still kind of see it. And then before we actually kind of trace the outline, or before we can actually trace the outline properly, there's one thing that we need to take a look at. And for that, I am going to bring your attention back to the footprint that we had here. So basically, everywhere that is dark, the entire area of the footprint itself is where there's going to be more pressure on the foot, which is why, this is the part of the foot that leaves the print. And so as a result, what's going to happen is whenever there's a lot of pressure applied onto the foot, it's going to have more padding. So for the heel, we'll need a little bit more padding on the side here of the foot as well. Of course, right before the toes, we'll need a lot of padding here because there's a lot of pressure applied there, and onto each of the toes as well. So not so much on the small toes, but on the big toe, definitely. So all we'll have to do is kind of just follow the outline that we already have, but instead follow it, further out and soften that curve, so that instead of having some like construction lines, we have instead a nice smooth organic curve. The process is going to be the same for the entire foot. So whenever there is no pressure, or in this case, whenever there's no padding needed, we'll still follow the lines that we have, but a little bit more closely, to represent maybe like a layer of skin. As you can see, I'm not following it completely directly on it. I'm just hovering above it slightly. And then the main difference here is that when we reach one of those points, so the heel, the side here, towards the front of the foot, we'll need to add a little bit more padding. So it can be just like that. Follow the padding here around the rest. So we'll work on the toes a little bit later, but here on the inside, same thing, right? And then here on the inside of the foot, again, there's going to be a lot of padding required on the outside here as well. So basically, you know, you can kind of recreate the entire footprint if you want, you know, if that helps, you know, something like this. And then you'll know that around this area here, it needs to be a little bit wider. And of course, for the big toe as well. So in this case, we can add a little bit of thickness here on each side. And then I'll want to make sure that I keep this outline here more or less. So what I'm going to do is actually start from here, the top, and then trace that going down and then kind of fading. So it's this line right here. Okay, and then I can move on to the toes themselves. So very similar, we'll want to kind of contour what we already have, but just soften all the lines, right? So for the big toe now, the big toe, we know it's actually not pointy like this. And then for the line here, instead of having those clear kind of you know, steps, which really do not look organic, well, instead all we'll have to do is kind of average that line here. So slight dip and then back out again. So this is what I'll try to do for this one here. So small dip and then back out again. And then I want to make sure that all the toes are of a similar width. So you don't want one that's really, really narrow compared to the other ones. And you don't want them to be too narrow again compared to the big toe, because that's not going to look quite right. So you can always adjust here. And you know, remember those toes are in 3 dimensions, right? So from this point, from this angle here, it'll appear like the big toe is in front, and from this angle here, it'll appear like this one is in front of this one, which is in front of this one, and etc., etc. Always keep in mind, you know, those are volumes, they're not flat. All right, so all that's left is to draw those nails, right? And then of course do a little bit more cleanup. But yeah, when it comes to the nails, it's going to be somewhat similar to the hand, as in the sense that the big toe here, or equivalent to the thumb, is going to be mostly pointing up, and that's going to be different than all the other ones. So we'll have this one right here. As you can see here, you know, if we look at the box and transparency, the nail is going to be placed on this face here of the box. And to know where to start the nail is going to be at about the halfway point again. So if we draw kind of like the joint for the toes, that is going to be at the halfway point from there. So in this case, you know, about half. So this is where the nail is going to start right about there. And I'm going to use again, you know, this face here as reference for the angle. And we always make sure that we start at the roots a little bit narrower. And then for all the toes, make sure that the nail, instead of being pointing up, actually points a little bit more towards the front, right? So if we look at the toes from this side view, we'll have kind of like the big toe like this, with the nail going up, pointing up. And then for the other toes, it's going to be more like that, right? And so the nail will be here instead, pointing more towards the front in comparison. Now let's zoom out and see what we get. So we still have a little bit of cleanup to do, but let's check it out. So yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's quickly remove all the nasty bits in here, clean this up a little better. We're pretty much done with this. So there's only a few small details that I want to point out, and those are going to be very easy to add because we already have all the different guidelines and landmarks that we need, and they're basically just going to be the tendons for the toes. So this is something that, you know, it's quite rare to have fat feet. There's not going to be a lot of fat that accumulates there. So for most people, you'll be able to see the tendons, at least, you know, when you point your toes upwards. And the tendons, well, they're going to start right at the base here. So we already have kind of like the base for it. You know, this is where all different tendons are going to merge, and this is towards the top of the foot right there. And so all we have to do is basically you know, trace a straight line from the toe. So from the, you know, the first joint of the toe to all the way back there. So like this, And the exact same thing for the other side here. So straight line, there we go. So of course, you know, it doesn't have to be this perfect. You can probably blend it a little bit, or maybe just not show it at all. But this is where this should be, if you were to, if you were to draw them. And lastly now, just like with the fingers, there's some webbing in between our toes. So the toes, even though in our drawing kind of like end right here, right? In reality, they end a little bit higher, but there's going to be some webbing here. So we can kind of fade, that line like this to indicate that webbing. That would be pretty much it. So we took our time because, I was explaining everything, but to do this again should be fairly quick. And of course, you don't have to do this every single time. You don't have to go through all the construction every single time. But if you want to place your feet in the proper position, if you have a complicated angle that you want to make sure that your feet are grounded, definitely I would recommend to do this. This works quite well. Zooming out again, there we go. So those would be this would be the way to draw feet in perspective, in proper proportions. Of course, sometimes the toes are different length. Sometimes the big toe is longer than this. Sometimes the entire foot is a little bit narrower. Sometimes it's wider. There's all kinds. But as you can see here, this looks pretty good, right? It looks like 2 feet, and they are in correct perspective, based on this guy right here. So this is the technique that I like to use to make sure, absolutely sure that everything is correct. And now we're gonna do the same thing, but really quickly for the front view and the back view, and then a couple extra examples in more complicated positions, but yeah, we're almost done. So for the front view here, well, we know that this is going to be kind of like the shape of our volume, right? And it's going to go something like this, be curved on the outside, be curved slightly on the inside, and that volume is going to be in front of the foot, so it's going to hide the ankle on the side. So next, the next step would be, well, to add kind of like the parts of the foot in the front, so it's like the toes and things like that. But in this case, it's pretty much flat. So all we can do is add like a separation like this, angled towards the front. Now from there, well, what I can start to do now is already add the padding, and we'll have some padding on the outside. Slightly erase all of these construction lines, but leave them kind of visible. All right, and then so the big toe is going to start right about there. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to be the tendon for the toes, so the split should be right in between, right? So right here, and then it goes straight, then down, and then ends like this. So very similar slope as this one here. So up, down, again. So a very subtle, step basically. So if I have kind of like this step right here and the step right here, trying to follow those lines here. Dong, 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 dong. The nails now for all of these. So I know that for the big toe here, the nail is going to be pointing upwards, so I'm not going to be able to see it a whole lot. And the other one, well, they're going to be facing us a little bit more. So yeah, there we go. I mean, as you can see here, the process is very similar. We just skipped a couple steps here and there, but we don't necessarily require all the construction lines like the first example that we did. And then again, we can soften the line here to indicate kind of like the webbing in between the toes. So if you zoom out, take a look at this. So there you go. So moving on to the back view now, which is going to be even simpler because we're not going to be able to see much of the toes. So for the heel, well, what we can start to do right away is kind of add a little bit of meat, a little bit of buffer around that puck, a hockey puck, just like that. At the bottom, it's going to be flat because it's a lot of pressure applied. And so you have a nice transition from the Achilles tendon and then kind of fade into the rest of the heel. And then for the front, well, we'll just kind of follow the line here. We know that from the outside here, it curves like this. And so on the outside here, well, I can, instead of having a straight line, I can give it a slight curve, pad here towards the front. And I mean, there we go. It's as simple as that. So pretty simple from this point of view. So now we're pretty much done with what I wanted to cover. Really quickly before we end, I want to draw 2 more in slightly difficult positions. So the first example here is going to be for someone tiptoeing. So I am going to be skipping over a lot. So let's say we have the leg right here, calf, and then meaning I'll have the ankle on the outside, a little bit lower, the ankle on the inside, a little bit higher, a hockey puck right underneath that. And then I need to add the toes, and the toes, they're going to be facing a different way. So the toe, the foot is pointing down, but the toe is going to be pointing kind of like sideways, because if the ground is right here, I'll make sure that I have the same shape. All right, so those would be kind of like the volumes for the toes, which is this box shape, as you can see here. And then for the toes, I'm gonna make sure that we add in the little steps, 1, 2, 3, and then the small toe is probably not going to be much visible. It's probably just going to be hanging here because it's shorter. So now we have kind of like the really, really rough construction drawing for it all. And start to clean this up, and then I can add the padding, and of course tilt it outwards again because we didn't do that yet. And now let's do the cleanup pass on this whole thing. And then we can make those fold a little bit more visible here, where the toes begin, bent right here. So there you go. So that's kind of how you do something like this. So there you go. It's the same overall process. Now we're going to do one final one, again, really, really quickly. The last one is going to be from below. Well, we'll have the leg that comes like this here, bump for the ankle, for the fibula, and then we'll have the hockey puck. So it's coming towards us. The foot is coming towards us. And so the puck, it'll seem like it's in front. And then this is going to be the front of the leg right there. So that's going to be kind of like the length of this particular foot, diagonal from here to here, about the halfway point between the ankles, and start going straight down. It's going to be kind of like the tip of the toes and the top corner here, which we're not going to be able to see. So I can start to erase all of this, curve the outside like that, curve the inside, and curve the inside kind of upwards too, so it'll look almost like a straight line in this case. And so now I also need to adjust kind of like the line here. All right, so now I have kind of like the base for my foot. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add the pads. So pads on the outside, pads in here, and use that to trace my footprints. Next one, next one, next one, then the big toe. Make sure that all those lines are nice and smooth. We don't want any sharp angles in here. And then finally, just finish off the toes. And yeah, we're left with a foot seen from underneath. It's not perfect because I didn't spend too long on it, but as you can see, still works quite well. All right, so to draw a foot after a while, you can start to simplify the different construction lines, and yeah, instead of go something like this, directly add it. Right here, so now I can add my toes to that. Toes, big toe, other toes, other toes. Padding is already included. Nail, 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 nail. And as you can see here, super quickly you're able to draw a foot that looks looks decent, right? So and this is all based on the same construction lines. I've just skipped a couple of them and simplified a lot of them. So there you go. This is the whole process. Hopefully this helps. So this is going to wrap it up for this chapter on drawing the feet, or chapter on feet in general. So in the next chapter and final chapter for the anatomy class, we are going to take a look at how to apply all that we've seen so far in a very similar way that I've just applied the techniques for drawing this foot, for example. So it's going to be pretty much fast forwarding through everything and quickly creating a body with muscles in place that look believable, that are in the right proportions, but super quickly, essentially trying to show you the real potential of this because this is something that I use. All that I've explained throughout the anatomy class is, I guess, a more constructed way of approaching my techniques, but it's essentially the same thing. So it's just cut up in more steps so that it's easier to follow. but I'll show you once you're able to go through this multiple times, do it over and over again, and so much so that you start to see patterns and that you start to be able to skip some steps. I'll show you kind of the potential of what this looks like and how you can quickly draw this with a little bit of practice. I'll see you then. All right, welcome back. And in this chapter, we are going to take a look at everything that we've seen so far. And we're going to basically apply the techniques in a very, very accelerated way, as if you had been working on this for a long time, had a lot of practice, starting really, really quickly with the skeleton. So I'm going to start with a character like this, draw the head, and now skeleton really, really quickly, and we'll have thoracic cage like this. It's going to be the front here, thoracic cage, split down the center, so I know that the sternum is right about here, and here we'll have the clavicles begin, and I have one bone, one joint here, one joint here for the shoulders. This very quickly, and then of course the joints here that starts on the side here for the hips. And it's going to go pretty much just down, straight down. This, like that. And so it's about what, half. The portion seems to be okay. Alright, so now let's just add the arms. Don't want to go for a pose that's too crazy. I'm just trying to show how the anatomy can be applied really, really easily, really quickly. So something like this should work for skeletons. As you can see, super rough, right? Yeah, so there we go. So starting from here, we have the pectoral muscles. So I do it like this. Up. I have my clavicles that go like this, all the way to the top of the joint right here. Pectoral muscles like that. It's going to go down, slide underneath, attach onto the humerus. And I have my abs here, go in and out, the back. The lats. I have my shoulders here, they're going to be wrapped with the deltoids. Just like that, and then I have the trapezius that begin here at the joint and in the top of the back. Like this. And then my abdominal muscles, the belly buttons are right about there, center right when that thing starts to bend, and then we'll have the obliques that begin here and go towards the front here on each side. I know that the V for my obliques is going to go somewhere, something like this, and then it curves up for the hip bone, right, and all the way in the back. We're not going to be able to see that. And then for arms, well, in the center here we have the deltoid that's going to end right about the center of the humerus, and then we have the bicep that starts a little bit, well, that starts right up here but then go down underneath deltoid and underneath the pectoralis major. So we'll have one bicep like this, another one like this, then we'll have behind here silhouette for the triceps. Actually, probably won't be able to see it from this angle, but we'll be able to see from that angle. All right, and back here, brachialis here, and then we have the brachioradialis group. It's going to start like this on the outside, and then we have the anterior compartment on the inside like this here. Then the hands, of course. So mouse shape. Beans, beans, beans. You can just do mittens. Then towards the front, we gotta make sure that we adjust the front portion of the ilium for the hip bones. So it's going to be right there. So we'll have kind of like the teardrop shape going like this, all the way down to the knee. It's going to represent the thighs, right? And then we'll have the other compartments, so the hamstrings in the back, and then the medial compartment going here towards the crotch. And then the TFL on the outside here. And then we'll be able to see the gluteus maximus and the gluteus medius, because that goes and attaches right here. Well, actually a little bit higher than that, right here underneath towards the top of the femur. So there we go. So on the inside here, we'll be able to see the quads a little bit more. It'll go a little bit lower. And then on the outside, it'll be a little bit higher. This. The knee. We have all the tendons going on the inside here. So this sartorius that begins here, goes down. Here it goes down, wraps around and attaches here towards the front of the knee, towards the front of the knee. And then here from the back, I'll be able to see a little bit of the quadriceps from this particular angle. Not much though, a little bit. And then, yeah, onto the lower portion of the leg now. So I have my knee right here. So the patella is going to be right about there. And then patellar tendon right below. So I have this here, here. And then I have my bone going like this. The ellipse for the calves slightly tilted towards the inside. And you just follow the outline here, connect everything. Now accentuate the line for the tibia right here. And then finally the feet. So on the inside here a little bit higher where the tibia ends, and on the outside the ankle is a little bit lower. And then we can just quickly sketch in the feet like that. Boom, boom. And then there you have it. So as you can see, super quickly we're able to get a figure that is anatomically believable, and super quickly be able to place everything in its correct location. All the proportions are correct. I didn't have to do much, or maybe they're not perfect humanoids, but they're pretty close, and at least they're believable. So everything together kind of works. And so there you go. So this was done super quickly. Of course, you know, this could definitely be better, but it was just to show you essentially the potential of this technique here. And when you approach everything in a logical way, when everything works together, when everything is connected together logically, it makes things super simple. Well, not super simple, but at least a lot easier to draw, a lot more approachable. So here we are. This is going to conclude this massive class on anatomy. I hope you learned a thing or two, and that all these tricks and tips and, you know, new knowledge really helps you with your own characters. And yeah, keep practicing. This is super important. The more you practice, the better you get. All these construction methods, all the different steps that we've seen, they are very important at the beginning to help you understand the logic behind everything. And then once you know it, you can start to skip things ahead. You can start to fast forward, and eventually, you know, end up being able to do this really quickly in a matter of minutes. So yeah, keep on practicing, and I'll see you later.